live streaming to the YouTube channel. So as soon as we're done today, you can see it now, as a matter of fact, but you'll be able to see the whole thing right up immediately. So hopefully I don't do anything super embarrassing. All right. The lowest part of framing is what? So we did talk about a little bit of this stuff: the footings, the piers, the subfloor, and the sill. Footings are the lowest point. Good job. Most of you got that. So the footings are those holes you dig in the ground and then fill with concrete or cement. I'm never sure which one, but it's one of those things. And that is the foundation upon which the entire house is built, right? So pier would be, nobody took that or chose that one, but that's the column. That's sort of maybe a block or a brick column built. And if it's a crawl space home, you'll see it, or a basement home, it'll be taller. And it's just supporting the middle part of the structure, like in the middle where the outside perimeter walls can't reach. The subfloor is several steps after the footing. Subfloor is not until we've had a foundation wall put in place, and then that subfloor is on the floor joists, which go across the foundation wall. That'll make more sense when we look at some pictures. And then the sill, there are a couple of places where the word sill could be used. There is something called a band sill, which is the lowest part of the framing, which is sort of a flat perimeter layer of board, probably 2x6 or 2x4, and that's what the walls. That's the first part of the wood. That's where the wood is resting against the foundation block or brick walls. Frequently, when termite damage occurs, it's eating up the band sill because that's the first wood they get to. They crawl up from the earth, they go up the side of the brick, probably on the inside of the crawl space, and then they hit that wood and they just start munching. And the problem is the band sill is carrying the full weight of the entire house, right? So that causes all kinds of fun creaks and pops and slopes in the floor sometimes. And it sounds like just an impossible fix, but it's amazing what the repair looks like. And those guys just know exactly what they're doing. They go up under there. I wouldn't want to do it, but they're under there on their hands and knees, or worse, because crawl spaces aren't always crawlable, and they are putting in jacks, and they're jacking up the house by a couple of inches so that they can swap out the band sill. It's just incredible. Sometimes the shady contractors or the shady repair people will just put new band sill over top of the old band sill, and it continues to rot or be eaten up. So sometimes you see improper fixes under there. But that's the sill. There's also a window sill that this word could apply to. But the lowest part of the framing, sorry. You know what? Okay, Monday brain. Framing is the wood, so the sill would be the best choice there. So that would be the band sill. Footing would be the lowest part of the entire house. That'd be the foundation upon which the whole house is built. So that framing word just completely escaped my vision right there. Little lesson there. Test taking lesson. Slow down, read it slow, and think about the words. It happens to the worst of us. That would be me. The measurement used to determine the heat produced by an air conditioning or heating system is called what? And let's see. HVAC is the system itself. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That's the system. That's the machinery and the vents, the ductwork, and all that good stuff. BTUs, British thermal units, are what the answer to this question is. That's how we know how much heat a system is going to produce. So good job to most of you there. The lowest part of construction. There we go. That's what Neil was trying to answer a minute ago. You know, it's bad when you refer to yourself in the third person. That is the footing. Lowest part of construction is the footing. There you go. That's the concrete poured in the hole, and that hole is a trench that's pretty much the shape of the footprint of the house. I'm going to show you some video here in a moment. Subfloor, again, that's the actual sheet good that lies flat upon which you can actually walk. And we already know about the sill. The highest part of the framing is what? So let's see here. We've got roof. The roof covers the whole house, obviously, but the highest part of even the roof is what is called the ridge board. So that's the part that when you see the roofers standing on it and they're the highest they can possibly go, they are standing on the ridge board up there, the peak of the roof. The most expensive type of home to build, we did cover that before we left the other day, is the single level or the ranch, a ranch style single level. A couple of reasons there. Number one, it's a larger footprint, so it requires more land to build upon. So you probably need a bigger lot than you could get away with for a 2-story. And then also the roof it requires to cover it is bigger than the roof would need to be on the same square footage of house. And I think I drew a high tech impressive graphic for you to demonstrate that the other day. And the 2,000 foot 2-story can be covered by a basically 1,000 square foot roof, right? Because they're stacked. 2,000 foot.
Put it back in the Louvre.
Say again.
Did you put your drawing back in the Louvre?
Yeah. I've since probably erased whatever that drawing was.
Oh dear.
No, I actually have it. Let's see here. Here we go. Here we go. So the single story, we'd have a lot upon which it would be built. Could be just any kind of shape. And that single story is, say it's a 2,000 square foot, it's going to be like that. A comparable lot, a 2,000 foot 2-story could be this footprint. And the side view, of course, looks like this. They're stacked. And here's our single level, because basically it's, that kind of a thing. And then, so therefore the roof on a single level is going to be basically twice the construction materials, twice the size, twice the labor to construct that roof. So crawl space in a basement is, main difference between a crawl space and a basement is basically the headroom, right? Crawling versus standing, essentially. Not whether it's finished, nobody chose that. Whether or not it's connected to the main floor of the house, nope, it wouldn't be that. Pardon me a moment. It's just simply how tall it is. Is it a basement or a crawl space? What do you have to do to walk around down there? Are you crawling or are you walking? Now, whether it's finished or not is another question. Is it a finished basement? Is it more of a root cellar where it has a dirt floor? Does it have a cement or concrete floor and then no framing yet because it's an unfinished basement? All of that matters when it comes down to measuring a property, because you have to specify if it's unheated or heated, and you have to specify that it's below grade. Meaning if you walked straight through the wall like a ghost, are you going to be underground? If you could do that all the way around and walk straight out the walls like a ghost and be above ground, then it's not below grade, right? Brilliant statement. You're fascinated by my intellect. So you've seen some of these walkout basements where the back side of the house is just like the rest of it, right? You could just walk in and out, straight in and out. But the front side of the house is fully under the earth in the basement. You have to give a discount for that. An appraiser has to give less value for that type of square footage and specify in the MLS that it's basement undergrade square footage. Now, that gets pretty clear cut when it's a basement, but when it's one of those tri-levels we saw the other day, where it's just maybe like a foot undergrade, you still have to call it undergrade and specify, look, this is not fully above grade. Sometimes the why doesn't matter for your purposes, but if I had to guess, I'd say water issues can happen when the side of a wall is up against the earth, because the earth contains water and you can have some seepage, have something called efflorescence, all kinds of fun, crazy stuff. The following terms relate to roof framing except what? Let's see, joist, rafter, ridge board, stud. Best choice there would be stud. Walls would have studs in them. Good job. Which of the following is part of the foundation of a home? We saw piers. We saw girders are the the joists that are the big ones. They're the things that the joists rest upon. And then the subfloor is the first layer of flat material. So header is not part part of the foundation. Best choice here would be pier. All of the following are part of a roof eave, except what? We've got fascia, we've got frieze board, we've got soffit, so rafter is the best choice there. The most common type of roof design in North Carolina is the gable roof. We'll see pictures of that in just a moment. Good job, everyone. Let me share something with you. One second. Good. Popped right up. This is a time lapse of an actual house being built. So what we've got going on now at this point is they're digging that either, yes, it would be a basement because it's below grade. There's footers being poured. They dug out the trenches. They're pouring some cement in those trenches to make the footprint of the house basically. Yeah. And they're doing some foundation walls that's in big panels. There's lots of different ways you can do a foundation wall. In this case, they have pre-made concrete panels that they're joining together, and then actually they're making, these are forms. They're going to fill those forms. Now they're about to pour the slab in the basement floor. And let's see, the grid, what you're seeing there, that's the grid pattern, is something called rebar. That's like a metal bar, because what an inspector will tell you is that there are a couple of guarantees in life, and one of them is that concrete will crack. So you have to control that cracking as best you can, and one way that you can help alleviate that is to put in steel within the concrete pour. Another way is to put actual control joints in it. That's why those lines are in your driveway. So when it inevitably cracks, we want it to crack within those lines, right? And you see those in garages too. Yeah. Now they're pouring. These are OSB, oriented strand board. You don't need to know that, but they don't warp. That's why they're better, or maybe chosen instead of traditional 2x6 lumber that are cut off of trees. These are made from chips of trees and highly packed, very dense, very heavy, but they don't warp because they're in multiple orientations. You can see basically the band sill is this vertical OSB. I don't know if you can see my little cursor there, right there. And it's in touch. It's in contact with the concrete. It's in contact with that highest level of either block or concrete that makes up the foundation wall. And that is what the termites get to first. When they come up out of the ground, they're going to make a little mud tunnel. You'll see little lines of mud, and that's the tunnel because they're blind and they travel through the dark. So they make this tunnel, and they get to the wood and they just feast. If that wood is wet because of a leak, they're drawn to it all the more because now they have food and drink. And they might just have a little highway going on back and forth for a long, long time. It doesn't take long for them to do some decent amount of damage. The good news is when you build new construction like these guys are doing, they're going to squirt termicide, some sort of termite treatment. It's required in North Carolina, at least, that they treat for termites when they build new construction. So that's a 1-year coverage. And if you're particularly concerned about it, you as the owner could continue that cycle every year and have a termite treatment company or wood destroying insect company come out and retreat and monitor it and pay them to do so with what is called a termite bond. So you might hear that term from time to time. What's your advice if your client says, should I get a termite bond? In the chat, what would be your advice about that? If they ever ask if they should do anything related to something like this, you say, absolutely you should. And here's a good company, here's a couple of companies, and if you recommend it to them and they say no, you should get it in writing and say, hey, remember, I recommended that to you. Please sign here saying that you're waiving your opportunity to do so that next year when the termites come, you can't come back and blame me and ask me to treat it for $1,500. Here's a nice aerial view. The walls.
I think the question was, can you pour cement over the subfloor?
So that's a good question. You might be thinking of tile. One thing that you do when you install tile is you actually use a mortar that looks like a cement so the tile can stick to it. But you would in that regard be kind of putting a cement-like thing there, but you would certainly not put like a 2 or 3 inch layer of cement over wood. The wood would always be on top of the cement. Sounds like something you saw. Working. Let's speed up.
Because in Dominican Republic, majority of their homes are built from cement.
Right.
The weather. So I was wondering what I've seen them do.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of layers of concrete on top of it.
Yeah.
But that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, that's a whole different ball game. And we get into building code. And in this state, obviously, there's codes about what is safe. So the question I would have there is, what does their code system look like? And how safe are the methods? They might be perfectly safe, but no, we don't really see that here. Yeah. If you'll notice, there's this horizontal, extra thick looking board over this garage. These are the garage openings. And these are called headers. And you'll see headers like this to beef up the support over large spanned openings, right? So there's going to be headers over any doorways, even like a person-sized door, and windows have headers as well. So you'll see these headers popping up all over. The larger the opening, the bigger that header needs to be. And when someone takes an old house and wants to blow out the walls and have a nice, pretty open floor plan, it's basically requiring putting essentially a header up in the attic if they can, but they call it, it's for supporting that long span now that they want to take the wall down. So when you're showing a house and they say, well, gosh, it's very traditional, it's very closed off, I want to open this up so the front windows reach all the way to the back, you just have to say, well, you need to get a contractor to look at it to see what is a supporting wall, what is a load-bearing wall versus not. Because you can't just knock out walls as an amateur. You would need to sometimes put a reinforcing support above to make up for the wall that you took out. You never want them to start with a sledgehammer without considering if the house going to fall down. There's a window header, and there's probably a double French door header going in right here. And there it is. Nice little rotating aerial view. We've got our subfloor. We've got our garage. It's a nice little floor plan. Got the stairs to the basement over here, and they have a double top plate on top of the wall. It's 2 levels of 2x4, 2 layers of it. On top of this wall, on these walls, they're going to put the roof framing, right? Now that really is, again, what's going to be covered by the finished product. So just like the subfloor, it's essentially the same product. It's in this case, an oriented strand board, and they're really heavy. They're heavier than pieces of plywood because they're just densely compacted with these huge presses. And they're made out of the wood chips so that they don't warp. So they're going to cover Now they're wrapping it with this plastic papery kind of stuff, house wrap, good name for it, just to kind of help with thermal retention. And now we're upstairs. We're putting in some roof joists, some ceiling joists. We got the crane supporting the ridge beam, right, that we talked about in the poll just a minute ago. That's the high point of the roof. You'll see some of these guys probably walking across it. If you ever watch that in real life, it's kind of terrifying. Hey.
Excuse me. Do you know this house is being
Well, this is a window.
No, in the basement.
Oh, in the basement. Yeah, you know what? That's probably a good indicator that it's not here, right? Is that your point?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that, and I'm thinking, I'm like, or is it somewhere where there are tornadoes or something?
It could be.
You know, that's kind of going to be their safe space. Okay.
So up north, they tend to have what I call real basements that are fully underground, right? We have more likely to have walkout basements down here. We don't see the fully underground unless they're a really old house. So it's probably somewhere north of, I would say, Virginia, to get a basement like that. But it's just because that's the way they do it. Another part of that has to do with the frost line. The colder the atmosphere, the environment gets, the lower you have to dig to get under the point of the ground that will freeze when it gets cold outside. You can't pour concrete above this frost line because when it does indeed freeze underground, it's going to push those footings up. So how deep you dig a footing has to do with how cold it gets and where that frost line is underground. So in our state, because it's not all that cold year round, we can dig a shallower footing than you could, say, in New York, right? Just going to town, there's a big old beam, a nice metal high beam for the garage because that's such a long span. That roof, the ceiling has to cross over. So some of the joists go halfway across to that big metal high beam steel, and the other half going over there. And they just keep on going. And now they're gonna, oh, there's a vertical part of the edge. Underneath view, they're putting the sheathing on the roof. That sheathing is going everywhere. It went on the floor, it went on the sides, and now it's going on the roof. And this is where they're going to put the shingles. They'll put some more paper over this, and then they'll put shingles over that. In this, of course, in this country, we use asphalt shingles by far most commonly. They'll also use a tin or metal roof. I once did a unique little side job in 2011, the World's Strongest Man. You've ever seen that? Where the famous monster guys throw around truck tires and really heavy things, and I worked it as a sort of a crew member for 3 weeks. So I met a lot of British and Scottish guys who were also crew members, and they said, why does no one around here have a proper roof? I thought about it, and I'm like, oh, you mean not stone. They're used to seeing stone roofs that last 100 years. They were seeing these little asphalt shingles that we use around here, and they might last 20 years, right? Shingles that had a roof job done. So they covered the roof in paper. These little things sticking up are plumbing vents because your plumbing line needs some airflow in order for it to drain properly. So you'll see these plumbing roof vents, and they cause a really fun problem after about 5, 10, 15 years. The rubber boot that sits around it wears out. And that is the source of many leaks, little subtle leaks, and quite often it shows up on an inspection report that the plumbing boot was leaking. Water got in through the roof through this plumbing boot because it was starting to crack. It's an easy fix, though. You don't necessarily have to fix the whole roof. You can just replace the plumbing boot. So that is what those pipes are. Now they're building sort of a shed roof off the back for probably a screen porch. Got a little bit of siding starting to go in, like a drip edge, this white part. Putting the roof sheathing on this little part here, and there's those shingles going. That's impressive to watch too. When they get a system, they just really good at town. And there is the finished exterior product. Now they got to get on the inside. It's sort of a race to get the roof on when you're building a house, because then you don't have to worry about the weather so much. Once you get the roof on, now you can, not that they want to take their time, but now they can do the inside without regard for the weather so much. They can, next step is going to be to start, these guys are putting in the driveway, because once you pour it, you can't necessarily drive on it as soon as it gets dry. You would need to let it cure. You need to let that concrete actually cure for a few days before it's actually still strong enough to support the weight of cars. Plus, you don't want it to get gross if it's new construction. It's a nice big wide driveway. One way that a builder can cheap out is to make a 2-car garage with a single car driveway, which is annoying. It would just sort of flare out right here, but then just be a single there toward the street. And that's just a way to look out. And as a broker, why are these houses cheaper? Oh, it's the driveway. Maybe there's an upgrade option to have a double driveway, but maybe your buyer would rather have that extra room in the house. They're cutting the control joints right now with concrete cutter so that they can kind of control where it's going to crack. And now they're putting in the windows. They've got to put this tape around the edges to keep any water intrusion from happening. You can't just throw the window in there. You got to put weatherproof tape in there first, and then they're installing those windows. Trim. They're putting in the fascia trim over that wood piece that is the fascia board. And then now over that trim, they might put gutters. I say maybe because that's another way a builder can cheap out. Another thing to look for when you're showing new construction in certain price points, especially, look at those fascia boards and see, oh, wait, oh, this is why it's such a cheap price compared to the one down the street, because there's no gutters. It's not that much more to put them on, but it's a way times 100 houses that a builder can save pretty significant chunk of money. But it's just annoying for your buyer client to live there. And what's inevitably going to happen if there's no gutters? Anybody live in a house with no gutters, you get the splash down here at the bottom, and it throws mud up on the side of the house, and there's just sort of a mess. And then if it's a basement like this one, that's all the bigger of a problem, because water falling straight off the roof to the ground is going to find its way into the house more likely. The gutter system is designed to divert the water away from the house, and that's your best course of action to prevent problems. They're putting in the soffit siding right now, the soffit trim, that horizontal piece that you see when you're looking straight up. And this soffit, you can see, has a little different color right here. That's because it's a vent. They put vents in the soffit to vent the attic. The attic space needs to have some ventilation. So air can go up in here and then it can come out of the top, because this house has a ridge vent that we'll look at next time they show us the above view. Now they're putting on siding, and in this case, it's probably what's called a hardy plank siding. It could also be a vinyl product or a wood siding, depending on where you are or what style of house you want it to look like. Could certainly be brick. We see a lot of brick in our state. It could be stucco or synthetic stucco, but this is probably hardy plank or a cement composite. So basically they mix up a special kind of fiberboard cement. They put it in a mold so that it looks like wood grain. So it looks like wood siding, but it's really made of cement sort of product. And that way it doesn't rot. So it costs more than vinyl usually. It costs more than wood usually. Doesn't cost as much as brick typically, but it will carry more value because of the less need to repair it over time. They are anywhere the two boards meet, they have to put some flashing so that water, and that's another way a builder can cheap out. Boy, all these ways, right? all the more reason to have your new construction inspected. A builder could very easily hire a subcontractor that leaves out these little pieces of flashing, and so water can get right in between these boards to the paper underneath, and that paper could wear out over time. Water could trickle down back in there and get to that wood sheathing, which is a big problem. Hey, sure. Well, the thing is, sometimes that builder's gone, right? They're long gone by the time you realize this has been done. And are you outside of a warranty period or not? Right? So that's another question.
So if you bought a house with that type of material on it, is there any way to know that the builder actually placed that on
An inspection.
before?
You need to always suggest to your clients, even in new construction, to have a third-party inspection. And they might push you back on that because they might think, well, why should a brand new house be inspected? It has warranties and it had the city inspector come look at it, but they miss little things like this sometimes. That city inspector is looking to see if there's siding. They don't necessarily look in those little cracks to see, is there some metal flashing up in those cracks, each one? They want to make sure the fundamentals are met. There's a minimum level of building standards that they're looking for safety purposes. That's not the same thing as something in place to make it last the longest. Having those flashing pieces in there, it helps it last longer. And that's a big difference in inspectors. City inspector for building code purposes versus a third-party inspector because you, the purchaser, want to make sure this place is built nice and solid. Back when we just had the walls but no roof, I've seen new construction where the bottom part of the roof, those ceiling joists, were not even touching the top of the walls on some of the interior walls, which just means over time the roof's going to start sagging. And that was missed by the city inspector, but the third-party home inspector that I recommended caught it, right?
That's what I was going to ask you. So you know how the inspector comes out to inspect, the home throughout the process of it being built?
Mm-hmm.
Is that not something he could catch?
Well, he may not be looking for it.
Oh.
Again, he's looking for basic minimum standards of what is in the building code and what is safe. Because just because that flashing is not there, that doesn't mean the house is going to fall down on somebody. That's what he's really looking for. The flashing being there affects how long is it going to last before I have any wood rot issues. Little things like that are what you want to have a third-party inspector to really look at it super closely. That's why you want that. As a broker, you want to be on record as having recommended it. And, after these poor buyers have paid out all this money in all these other places, sometimes they're like, you know what, my uncle from Arizona was a builder 40 years ago. We're just going to have him come out and look it over. Okay. Well, I hope he knows what North Carolina codes are and what, if he's even tuned in. But they have the right to have anybody look at it or not look at it that they want to. You just want to go on record, have it in writing that you suggested an actual licensed contract or inspector for North Carolina. Please do, Renee. That'd be wonderful. Renee's going to let you know about an experience.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So you guys are talking about new construction, and there might be some issues that the inspector, if the buyers elect to have an inspector, which you should always really, really, really encourage them. And when you have experiences where you can actually tell them something that has happened to you, it makes more sense to them. Like they're not just thinking you're saying it's a hypothetical and now they have to spend some more money on something that should be new and perfect. But I've had buyers where the siding, it wasn't installed correctly, and the builder had to bring back out the installers to fix it. Or in other cases where they installed it correctly, but it doesn't look like it was. And we had to get a letter from one of the reps from the installers to say that it was installed correctly. Also with the roof, some of the trusses were repaired and the inspector caught that. So we had to have the builder write a letter saying that they were repaired per the instructions that the company gives them. It was repaired correctly. And you want that to keep, so when the buyers go to sell their house and it gets called out again, you already have evidence that everything was done properly. And now you don't have to have your sellers or the new buyers spend money or walk away because they think there's something wrong. So yeah, definitely encourage them to have an inspection and, be proactive about some of these things.
That's great. That's great advice. The first time that happens to you in the wild, you'll make a note of it and you'll always be looking out for that particular issue. That's how this business works. After you learn the rules and laws in this course and get the license, the rest of it is mostly on the job training. And you keep a little list, either mentally or hopefully in writing, and like, oh, here's what I learned from this transaction. It's okay, and it is certainly possible. It's a better answer for Danita that you just gave, Renee. Yeah, there is some action after the fact. Just like she pointed out, you can go after the builder, have them go after because they're going to pass the buck. They're going to say, well, I thought it was right. Let me check with the subs. And everybody's going to try to point the finger to someone else to get that money and that fix to take place. But that's part of the process too. Depends on how big the problem is. If it's a basement issue related to the foundation, some sort of a crack in the wall, or maybe the basement wall is starting to bow inward because of the pressure, probably from excessive water content of the soil outside. Now we're talking about getting the opinion of a structural engineer. And that could apply years and years later, because over time that sort of thing could happen. Maybe it wasn't built right. The structural engineer's letter is going to cost several $100s, but it's going to be, here's what my professional opinion is as to what the problem is, and here's how it should be fixed. Then you go about getting contractors to give quotes on how much they'll charge to do the fix. So it's sort of a combination of a structural engineer's opinion plus the contractor's opinion, and how much is it all going to be and who's paying for it. So it can get pretty dicey. You just wanted to close on the house and get your paycheck, but now all this popped up. They're putting some stonework on the bottom part. Since it's the front, they're making the front a little more fancy. They'll probably put hardy plank above it, just like on the sides. And that black paper, that is so that they can put the mortar for the stonework, and that looks like it's going to be around the garage doors too. So it'll be a cute house. There we go. There's that stonework. Now they're trimming out looks like it's just a covered patio. And we're almost done. Not much more time. Sometimes you go into new construction and it's like, we're closing next week. How is this possibly going to be finished? But it's amazing what that builder will do to get that paycheck. They can send in just tons and tons of people to knock it out because they know that this one's closing. I'll get my money and I can move on to the next one. And they usually make it happen. You just want to make sure nobody cuts corners when they do it so fast. Looks like a nice vinyl railing maybe they might be putting in, or maybe a metal. There we go. Oh, let us know, whoever that is. I don't know where that Never really seen it. Looking for a top of the roof picture. So you can't really tell, but right here along these top point ridges, I believe I saw a gap earlier when they were putting in the sheathing. So there's a ridge vent there, which allows some vent space, ventilation, because heat rises and it's going to rise up and come out of the top of the house. And you want some airflow up there to control the heat accumulation, because the hotter it is in that attic, the less life the shingles potentially could have. So there's all kinds of issues to consider. And you can check out some of this on your own time. But one more interesting channel that I like to look at is this guy. He is ridiculous. He is called The Crazy Framer. I think he's in Canada. And his early videos were literally how to build a house by yourself. He did it for other people, but he would be out there framing just whenever, all by himself. Here's his very first video. Look at this guy. He made himself a bridge, which is like a single piece of wood that he just runs on down. And now watch, he's going down to get a roof truss. The truss is something that's made in a factory they don't frame out, oftentimes they don't stick build the roof system like we saw in that last house. Sometimes they will build the roof pieces in a factory and bring them out to the site, and they're made in a controlled environment. It's a good way to do it. They're made very technically to exact dimensions, and this guy is just a monster, but he is carrying each one of these trusses up here, putting them in place by himself. But this thing has lots of load potential. It can really carry a lot of load because it's designed that way. He's just going to go about putting those trusses in one by one. I think one of his videos I saw, he actually did fall. He sets his GoPro up and in his car because sometimes it's so cold the camera freezes wherever he is.
Crazy
Here
framer
he's
here.
standing up some trusses. If you want to get a good inside view, oh, there he goes. Oopsie. Just a little fall, no big deal. A good inside view of what it looks like out there without going to the new construction. Check his channel out. It's pretty good. Let's go ahead and have our break. We'll come back and knock out the rest of that new construction, our construction chapter, and we'll get into our license law review. And I'll see you in 10.
Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. 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 All right, let's go.
Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Don't lose sight, baby, don't
we're not gonna lose sight.
baby, don't lose sight.
Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back.
I'm getting sick of the industry. I've had enough of the make-believe.
Back.
Oh, please, oh, please,
talk about-
am I lost or found? I'm getting sick of the ups and downs. No need to give me the run around. I'm out, I'm out.
This shit's gonna kill me, but I won't let it. And I try to give them help, but they don't get it. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. And they try to give me hope, but I won't give it. And this life will get you down, but I keep living. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight.
Kidding me?
We saw the footing being poured.
I'm getting sick of the in-between. Running in place isn't interesting to me.
Part of
To me,
construction.
am I good enough? Oh, is that even edible? Is it love? I'm checking the prices, I'll give it up. Now what?
A minute.
Now what?
This shit's gonna kill me, but I won't let it. And I try to give them help, but they don't get it. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. And they try to give me hope, but I won't give it. And this life will get you down, but I keep living. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. Don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. No, we're not gonna lose. Hey, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight.
That does the footings.
This
Got a crew that
shit
does
ain't
the
ever gonna
foundation walls. Got a
change.
crew that does the
Ain't ever gonna
framing,
change.
the floors and the walls.
Ain't
Then you
ever
got
gonna
plumbers and
change.
electricians. Well, when those framers build the floor
And this
space,
shit ain't ever gonna change. Ain't ever gonna change. No. Hey. Oh, and this shit's gonna kill me, but I won't let it. And this shit's gonna kill me, but I won't let it. So I tell myself when I sleep at night,
many times.
this shit's gonna kill me, but I won't let it. And I try to give them help, but they don't get it. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight. And they try to give me hope, but I won't give it. And this life will get you down, but I keep living. So I tell myself when I sleep at night, don't lose sight, baby, don't lose sight.
So that's just sort of a fact of the business. Foundation types, crawl spaces,
No,
basements,
it
and
ain't
slab
ever
foundation. Here's the difference. Crawl spaces and slab. Stand
No,
up a
it
little
ain't
bit and
ever
walk around in
gonna.
that. This isn't a finished
Crazy.
It might have some a bit of a smell.
Jordan, give us a low
Part
one.
of the process of finishing the basement is to maybe have a dehumidifier.
Three, one last one.
Sometimes you'll see white stuff, white residue on the walls that are
And this shit ain't ever gonna change. It ain't ever gonna change. It ain't ever gonna change. This shit ain't ever gonna change. It ain't ever gonna change. It ain't ever gonna. shit, I ain't never gonna. Ooh, yeah.
Never put a
I ain't never gonna change, baby.
It's concrete, which looks like it's attached to the house, but it's really kind of got a right here. If you look around the garage of any given house, you might see that little black material in between the slab and the wall.
This shit ain't never gonna change.
Kind of connected where they kind of.
It ain't never gonna change.
Those termites like to crawl up the side of the
But
brick.
I'm never gonna
That wood, that
change.
soil, it has to be treated when it's new construction. And a termite bond protects people after the fact. Every year, maybe even a couple times a year, the termite company will come out, take a look, see if any damage has happened, and they'll handle it as part of the fee for the bond. Now that the foundation is in, the floor framing goes in, and then followed by the wall framing and then the roof framing. They all have things in common. They all involve sheathing, right? The floor framing has some subfloor that's a sheathing type of material, that sort of plywood. It may be different kinds. It might be an OSB. It might be an actual good old-fashioned plywood. But that's the floor sheathing. And then the wall framing has sheathing on the exterior. We'll see in a moment. Here's the wall framing. The bottom part of it is the sill. We see the word sill again. The window sill is the bottom part of the window opening. The top part of the opening is the header, like we saw. And you'll see that there's one layer of 2x4 on the bottom, and there's 2 layers on top. This is the top of the wall there. This is the sill plate of the wall. And here's how it looks in the crawl space once the wood starts going in. This big monster piece of wood here in the middle, that's called a girder. The girder is the thing that supports the longer spans. The floor joists are built on top of the girder, and the girder is resting on the pier. So this dirt you can see is exposed here in the crawl space. There are some nice fancy crawl spaces that are what's called encapsulated, and they'll hire a company to put plastic all over the entire crawl space and up the walls and connect it to the heating and air system so that the air is treated. It's just extra thermal insulation, and it's nice and clean. I don't mind going in those crawl spaces because it's like some kind of weird, completely plastic special room. So floor joists are what the subfloor rests on. The girders is what the floor joist rests on, and the piers are what supports the middle part of the joists and girders. Termites can crawl up those piers too sometimes. And sometimes if it's an older house, somebody will notice the floor sagging, and you as the broker, maybe it's a basement, so it's not that hard to walk through. And I certainly don't try to get up in crawl spaces if I can help it. So it's not an expected thing for you to have to do as a broker. But what you'll notice is they didn't do the pier properly. They tried to support that saggy part of the floor by just what's called dry stacking. And they didn't put mortar in between. Maybe they didn't put a footing for this pier to stand on to be supported by. All kinds of creative things. Sometimes it's a car jack or any other number of terrible solutions. Now that you have floor joist, you can put this subfloor on there like we saw in the time lapse earlier. There's the joists. Here is the header of the window opening. There's also headers over door openings. There's the studs that make up the bones of the wall, so to speak. This is a type of framing called post and beam. It allows for longer, bigger expanses within the structure so that you don't have to have beams in the way inside the nice big open living room, for instance. Open spaces without interior supports, post and beam framing. Here's how it ends up looking inside. Big difference between that and maybe a 1950s house where every room has 4 walls with a door and there's not these open spaces. And when people want to turn an old house into this kind of a look, again, need to give a lot of attention to what is a load-bearing wall. Don't just give them advice. Yeah, let's knock it out, see what happens, right?
Neil,
Hey,
will you repeat that one more time?
which thing?
Post and beam
Post and
allows
beam.
for longer.
Oh,
bigger-
expanses, like bigger spaces inside. You don't have to have like beam supports. You can have this huge 20-foot space without having a column in there. that good?
Thank you.
You're
Yes,
welcome.
thank you.
And here's our roof framing. Now that the walls are up, they're putting the roof on that. That bottom part of the roof framing is the ceiling joist. We had floor joists, and that's what you put the subfloor on. The ceiling joist is the bottom part of the roof framing. If you go up in the attic, you're walking on the ceiling joists. And I'd say 90% of houses has had someone who tried to walk only on the joist, but they forgot and they stepped through the ceiling. Anybody who's got some experience in the room had a moment where you've heard that from an owner. They say, oops, that's where we stepped through back last Christmas. We were trying to get the decorations out. They just forget themselves. They don't step on the actual joist. They step in between it, and that's just sheetrock drywall, and that does not support anybody. Or like Christmas Vacation. Remember when Clark stepped through the ceiling and just stood there, and you're like, why didn't you just come the rest of the way down through the ceiling? Because it wouldn't make us for as good a movie, right? The angled pieces of the roof or the rafters, that's what the sheathing of the roof is going to rest on. And then that testable question we saw earlier, the highest part of construction. You know what? If you look back in the Relink book and see from this chapter how many questions there are, it's like 1, maybe 2. Or this plus 2 or 3 other chapters all combined for maybe 2. This is a high chance question you could see from this chapter. That's why we're not spending much time on it. Highest part of construction, the ridge board. Lowest part of construction, the footing. Lowest part of framing, the sill. Write those 3 down, and those are pretty highly chance test questions that you might run into.
I've heard that from many, many students.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Here's a side view of how it looks where the roof comes and meets the wall. And so this furthest point down here, hopefully you can see my little pointer, is the fascia. And again, that's the part that you attach the gutter to. Underneath that you see when you look up from the ground is the soffit, has the soffit vents that help with the ventilation in the attic. And that's also where the wall meets the roof system. And then the first board that is next to the soffit, the first board on the wall, is called the frieze board. Just some level 1 definition words you need to know. Fascia, soffit, and frieze board. Here's that sheathing on the walls, and then here's the siding to the right, the finished siding versus the sheathing. And you can kind of see the garage door header and the window header. When it comes to windows, there's a couple of vocabulary words you might run into. The grids of windows, they don't make them exterior anymore. The new modern windows have the grids built in between the panes. Much easier to clean. Anybody had to clean old windows and you have to clean this one and then this one and then this one, and it's just a big pain. Literally pain. Haha, glass joke. Mullion is the vertical piece. Muntin is the horizontal piece. Mullion versus Muntin. I'd be surprised if you saw it, but you could. These are a couple of vocabulary words that they acknowledge, but just know them. And you can see all kinds of different styles. And sometimes the mullion is bigger. Sometimes the muntin is longer. Depends on if it's like a craftsman style or just a traditional grid style, or sometimes there's no grid. Sometimes there are grids, but they took them out because they wanted to clean the windows. They didn't put them back in because the windows around the 80s and maybe 90s had removable grids. Then they finally started putting them inside the glass. And oftentimes the modern panes of glass are 2 pieces of glass with a vacuum space in between that has like a gas, some sort of a gas product in it that adds R value. R value is like a thermal value that helps with energy efficiency. Here's our sheathing on the roof. We've seen it on the floor and on the walls. Now it's on the roof. And then another very testable question is the most common type of roof you'll see in North Carolina is the gable. Here's lots of different kinds. The gambrel there in the middle is sort of a barn roof. You see that when you're building a barn. Hip roof just doesn't have this gable end. They just make roof. It's like a complete cap on top of the house. A shed roof is what you'll see when they put a porch off the back or off the front. A mansard roof is something you might see that was reminiscent of England. See a lot of mansard roofs over there. And we have them here too. Older parts of Charlotte, you'll see neighborhoods with mansard roofs. And then a flat roof is something you'll run into with contemporary style houses. It's got a bit of a slope to it, but this word parapet, if I were standing on this flat roof, you would only see me probably from the knees up or maybe the waist up, because that parapet is essentially a half wall. And it's because these flat roof structures will oftentimes put the heating and air system, mechanicals, the ugly stuff, on top of the roof. Nobody wants to see that from the street. So they hide it with a parapet or a half wall kind of a thing. We don't see very many flat roofs. They've got to really be maintained, because you can get a lot of leaking if they're not maintained properly, because the water doesn't run off as quickly. But by far, the gable end roof is the most common kind. Looks like this. Your classic cracker box, I'll call it a cracker box style ranch. This has a garage coming off the front. So it has 3 gable ends, 2 on each side of the house and 1 on the front there at the garage. How steep is the roof? That brings to mind the term pitch or slope, or also known as rise and run. When you're building a roof, you have to decide, what do I want to do with the top level of this house? Do I want to try to get more living space in it? Well, if I put a steeper roof on it, then I can actually walk in the attic and finish it and turn it into another room. Add more bang for the buck. Because if you're already under roof, that's the cheapest extra square footage you could do, is to finish an attic, as long as you can actually use it as a room and walk in it. So the good part about a steep roof is you have livable space that you could actually utilize. The bad part is I don't want to walk on it. You'd have to have like tethers and ropes and things to safely walk on it if you needed to do work up there. So how far up versus how far over is the pitch of the roof. And then what you'll see when you're up there, anytime something comes up through the roof, like a chimney, to, again, help with water protection, is to put flashing in place. This metal stuff is a very poor flashing job that you'll see. And it might be doing the job, but they got a lot of issues. I think an inspector would write a couple of pages worth about this particular flashing. But the essential idea is to kind of slide this metal sheeting up under the shingle so that it makes an impenetrable barrier that water cannot get into the house through. Once we have the roof all done, now we're going back inside the house to work on that part. We need to work on the insulation, but first they're going to run the plumbing and electrical lines first. Once they've done that, they're going to put in the insulation. And that is so that you don't pay $1 million on your power bill, right? You need to insulate this house so it doesn't just escape. Heat and cooling doesn't escape. And how well it retains heat is known as R value. So each of these kinds of insulation, the kind on the walls versus the ceiling, has a different required R value as per building code. Building code says you need this R value for the wall insulation and this other one for the ceiling. Might be different, might be the same, depends on the area, but it's basically resistance to the transfer of heat. And once that oh, by the way, that third-party building inspection I was talking about, that happens in 3 different time periods of the building process. Like a normal inspection is going to happen right before, sometime during the due diligence period, right? But when it's new construction, they're going to come out at least 3 different times during the building process, because that inspector wants to see what is going to eventually be hidden. They're going to come out and look at it after the electrical and plumbing goes in to make sure that's done right. Then the insulation goes in. They're going to come back and look at it to make sure that's done right. And then they're going to come back at the very end once it's all finished. That way they can see the walls before they're covered up. And this is what covers them up. Drywall or sheetrock is a very common one. There's lots of different things you could cover. Paneling from the 60s and 70s, you saw a lot of paneling. But sheetrock is our material of choice these days. It's easy. Those sheetrock people can just knock this stuff up in no time. And see those white lines? That's mud. It's called sheetrock mud or joint compound, and that hides the nail holes from when they had screw holes, nail holes, and the seams between the panels. That way, when they sand it down and paint it, prime it and paint it, it looks like a nice, perfectly smooth surface. And somebody who's good with that mud and covering up those holes is an artist. It is amazing how fast they do it. You should just watch it. If we had time, I'd show you another video of that. It's everywhere. It covers the ceiling. It covers the walls. And then it's time to put our heating and air system in. Heat, ventilation, and air conditioning is HVAC, and then BTU is British Thermal Unit for the heat output. The air conditioning system, you've got a compressor outside the house running through refrigeration lines to the unit inside the house, and it's pulling air from inside with the air returns. Those typically are the things that have filters that you need to change every month. And then it's pushing the air out through the vent system into all the different rooms of the house. There might even be a 2-unit system. The house might be so big it needs 2. Or it might be a single system that is a split system where they can change how much air goes upstairs versus downstairs. There are building codes in place, hopefully to keep people from dying, from houses falling over, from electrical shocking people, or water being a problem. So these building codes are minimum standards of construction. And again, just like we saw in other parts of the course, state versus county building codes, which have to be followed, the stricter one, right? Doesn't matter that it's state versus county. What matters is the stricter one is followed. And the local inspectors are the ones looking for those codes. They're seeing, oh, no, you didn't quite do this right. You didn't space the electrical outlets enough, close together enough, or the outlets in the garage need to be protected against water, which are called ground fault interrupt circuits. You might have heard of those. You don't need to know that. But things like what kind of electrical outlets are you putting into which rooms? Anything near water needs to be a GFCI, ground fault circuit interrupt. That'd be an example. And so we as brokers need to ask our sellers when we go to list the property, that's a lovely sunroom you had put on after you had the house built. Did you get it permitted? Did you get a permit before you had it built? Because the permit process, yeah, they have to pay money for the permit, but it's because they're sending a city inspector out to take a look along the way to make sure it's built right. So when they give you the bad news that, no, I did it myself, I didn't get a permit, I wanted to save the $50 or however much it is, your next move as a broker is to tell the whole world, this is an unpermitted addition, because they need to know that it's material fact for that buyer to know that that is an unpermitted structure or addition. And what happens when it's unpermitted? It might need to be corrected. It might have to be torn down and rebuilt. It could be a big deal. You as a broker just need to get that liability off your shoulders by telling everybody what you know. Ask and tell, discover and disclose. Here's what you're trying to accomplish when you're building new construction. It's all about this document right here, the Certificate of Occupancy, the CO. The home has passed all of those required inspections for minimum building codes. It is now safe to occupy. Can't spend the night there until you have a CO. Can't actually close on it until you have a CO. That builder is racing to get to this point, because now that they have a CO, they can sell it and make their money and go build the next one, right? There are minimum standards for government-backed loans as well. And as we saw with a government-type loan, FHA, VA, for instance, we're trying to protect that consumer all the more, because we're trying to help them get into housing where they otherwise couldn't, because of maybe lower credit score, maybe less down payment. And the whole point is to set them up for success, not failure. So just like an FHA appraiser is looking really hard at the house and they want to make sure the roof has enough age on it that the person's not going to have to spend $10,000 on a new roof next year or more, the building codes for government-backed loans are probably and could certainly be more restrictive than even the local building codes. I had a situation where it was a townhouse complex. It was an older one, and there were 6 total buildings. Each building had like 4 townhouses in it. The one that my buyer wanted was the last one built. The builder had to pay extra money to get FHA approval for the first 5 buildings. They wanted FHA approval to be built to these higher building codes so they could get FHA buyers to be able to buy them with FHA loan money. But then I think they had enough momentum on that 6th building. They didn't bother to pay the extra money to get the FHA approval. And so my buyer who was using an FHA loan couldn't buy the unit that was in that 6th building because it wasn't built to FHA standards. So therefore, they didn't have any other option. They had to use an FHA loan. And so we had to keep looking. So we had to discover that. We just discovered it in our process of there wasn't due diligence back then. This was probably 20 years ago. But thankfully, we did run across that. She was able to we could find her something that was FHA approved. And it took a little more searching. In order to become a general contractor, there's a process. There's education. There's a big fat book that you have to learn and have a nice big fat exam to take to prove that you know what the building codes are. And when do you have to hire a general contractor? You would hire an actual general contractor if the job in either building it or renovating it costs more than $30,000. They have to have a GC license if the job costs more than $30,000. If it's less than 30, and that's why a lot of builders, or I should say, like people that do decks and sunrooms, they specifically do them for jobs that are less than 30 because they don't want to have their GC license and they don't want to get it, or maybe they can't get it. Part of this process to get your general contractor license is to get bonded, and you have to have some money. You basically have to have some backing, some financial backing in case you screw up. So it's not just as simple as sitting for a class and a test like getting your real estate license. You have to go through more of a financial approval process as well. Okay, that concludes our construction presentation. Let's do, I believe we got carried away. I got carried away, and we somehow skipped environmental. So we're going to catch up on that right now. So here's the little baby, tiny 30-minute environmental chapter. We'll get through this real quick. We've covered some of it when we talked about lead-based paint. There we go. Because that's one of them. So we're going to look at the broker responsibility, the laws, the signs of environmental hazards, and what's the liability to us as brokers. We need to disclose material facts. When it comes to environmental hazards, it's all material fact. And we're looking for red flags. We don't need to be experts, but we need to know to refer them to experts. This is early. This is like section 6 of the syllabus, Ashley. So
I
it's,
think it's 21,
thank you.
page 21 in the syllabus.
So let's take a look at these various ones. There's probably about 4 or 5 that we're going to look at. We're going to be looking at how the exposure happens, what's the risk to the health, and how is it remediated or fixed. The word for fixing when it comes to environmental stuff like mold and lead-based paint is remediation. Need a remediation done to fix this thing. We're going to start with lead-based paint because that is connected to a form we need to use. The lead-based paint disclosure addendum. It's only for properties built before 1978. So that's a little mental note. When you go on a listing appointment, one of the first things you ask them and find out yourself is, was this house built before 78? Because if it was, there might be some lead-based paint down in there somewhere. Under all the layers. It's been painted many times since 78, so somewhere in there may be some lead-based paint. It's for both sales and rentals. Whether you're renting something or selling something, you have to disclose if it was built before 78 because there could be lead-based paint. And lead poisoning can cause all these sorts of problems. Nervous system, brain, kidney, blood problems. If the little baby chews on the windowsill and ingests the lead-based paint over time, or if the windows are painted with it and as you're opening them, it releases the dust in the air that gets breathed. And if you have work done on a house built before 78, a contractor is going to need to be approved to do a careful repair work that involves, they'll probably wear a respiration system. They ask you not to be there. They'll mark it off. They'll block it off with plastic. To do it properly is to reduce the chance of the lead-based paint getting released and being breathed in. This is a form, a document that you would present to your client called Protecting Your Family from Lead in the Home. You can find it through EPA, epa.gov, and you can get that free PDF. And so you have to give the seller and the buyer, you want them to see what the deal is with lead-based paint. And the gist of the lead-based paint procedure is that we're not required to investigate. The seller is not required to have it tested, but the seller is required to say whether they've had it tested. Have I had it tested or not? Check the box on the disclosure. And many times they have not. They might have if they had work done on the property, and therefore the contractor did the testing to see, okay, am I going to need to use the suit? Am I going to need to like mask things off and be extra careful because it definitely has lead-based paint? If that happened at some point in their ownership, then they're going to know, oh yes, it did test positive for lead. Therefore, they need to check that it tested positive for lead. Check the box, I should say. Because that is a material fact. Homeowners must disclose if they know that it has lead-based paint. They're not required to find out, but it might have it because it was built before 78. And we as brokers have to disclose as well. So repairs for compensation require being certified by EPA to handle the lead-based paint. If you're doing repairs on your own, or if you're doing them for free, it's not required. But if they pay somebody to do the repairs, they need to be certified to handle lead-based paint carefully. Another issue, especially like FHA borrowers again, is if the paint on this house built before 78 is peeling all the way down to the wood, then clearly the original paint layers that could be lead-based are falling out. Maybe those chips are falling into the dirt, getting in the ground, maybe seeping into the water supply. So anytime somebody scrapes and paints their outside windows, they can't just let the wood chips fall everywhere and just go in the ground. The proper way to do that would be to collect those chips, lay out tarps. If you pay somebody to do that work for you, they've got to make sure that none of those wood chips, or paint chips, I should say, get into the ground. But if the owner's doing it themselves, they are exempt from the requirement. They're not required to do that sort of thing. So that's lead-based paint for the most part. Asbestos is fun. Let me see. I don't have the photo in front of me. But I have a lovely photo from like the 1950s that looks like snow. It's literally fake snow that they sold in boxes, and it was asbestos because it looks like snow. It's nice and fluffy. It feels good against your skin, but it is dangerous, right? The problem with asbestos is that you could breathe it in, and it's got these tiny little filaments, these little particles that you breathe in, and that could turn into cancer. It was also coincidentally banned in 1978. There's not an asbestos disclosure like there's a lead-based paint disclosure required. If you know it, you got to disclose it. But the problem is it's friable. Here's a testable word, friable. It can be broken up into dust particles and breathed in. That's the hazard of of asbestos. It can be breathed in, become airborne. Asbestos was used in all kinds of products. It's a great product because it's resistant to fire. It's great for insulation. It just happens to cause cancer. So there's that little downside, right? But you might see, it's not a great flooring picture. You might see like old schools, old government buildings have those multicolored 12-inch square floors. And the early ones were made of asbestos. And see, they're scraping that up. I don't know if you can tell that they're scraping that up. In the process of scraping that up, is it releasing dust that can be breathed? So you don't want to just get out there and start scraping. You need to have proper ventilation or respiration. Yeah, roof shingles for sure. Siding as well. There on the far right. Siding can be asbestos. One way to control the asbestos is not necessarily to remove it. Many times, instead of removing it, because removing it could cause it to break and therefore, again, release the dust in the air. But instead of removing it, they just cover it up with other siding. Maybe that hardy plank siding or maybe vinyl. And that is okay. It's allowable. You're basically what's called encapsulating it. When it comes to lead-based paint, as well as asbestos, encapsulation is a proper potential way to remediate. A lot of big words there. So it could be siding, could be roofing, could be ceiling tiles. If you see those sort of white speckly ceiling tiles that are kind of, if you touch it, it feels like foam, or sort of older houses in the 50s and 60s, that certain sizes, I forgot which size, there's like a 9-inch or an 11-inch, and one of them is probably more likely that it's made of asbestos. So it could be everywhere in certain ages of houses. But here are the two ways: removal or covering it up. Encapsulation just means covering it up. Removal is going to be more expensive. It's going to require a lot more labor and a lot more risk that you make the problem worse because you're releasing things into the air to be breathed. That's why encapsulation tends to be the most common handling of asbestos remediation. Radon. Anybody heard of radon? Radon is a silent killer, so to speak. It's colorless, it's odorless. You can't taste it. You don't know it's there. You would have to have it tested. You'd test for it, right? More likely that it's going to be a higher concentration in the air when it's a basement or a crawl space. Thing about the crawl space is you've got the ventilation. So if it is coming up through the dirt in your crawl space, it's probably going out through the vents in the crawl space before it gets into the house, maybe. So inspectors don't tend to be worried about radon levels in the crawl space because they figure it's going to vent on out to into the air and not get into the house. That's the problem. Is it in living area where people can breathe it in on a regular basis? Because that can build up over time. And I believe it's the number one cause of lung cancer. Radon, number one cause of lung cancer. It's caused by the breakdown of like mineral deposits in the earth. Uranium turns into radium, turns into radon gas, and it comes up through the earth. It is unpredictable. You could have it coming up in one house and the house next door has no sign of it. Renee makes a great point. Granite counters, any granite product could be emanating radon gas. That's why radon, you think about it in a basement home, but there have been significant radon levels in like 13-floor apartments way up in there because it's coming out of the counters, because the counters are made of granite. Yeah. That's interesting about the colors. I didn't know that. Some colors have more radon than others. Wow. All of this stuff that you learn. That's why no two brokers are alike. We have different experiences that we learn from. That's why it's good to network and talk to other people. The popcorn ceiling, I think the biggest hazard with that is the looks. People just don't like the looks, and the removal is annoying. But as far as I know, unless the ladies in the room can verify otherwise, I don't think popcorn is necessarily known for being made of asbestos. Maybe in certain ages, but I think it's just a cosmetic thing, really.
Yeah, there is asbestos in it. Could I just make a comment on asbestos, Neil?
Of course.
The reason that it's just so actually lethal is exactly what Neil said. It breaks down into the dust and you breathe it. But what the dust really is, it's teeny tiny, like needles. When you're sewing and you're mending and you have a little tiny needle that keeps things together, if you just make that itty bitty bitty bitty, it's like little pins. And then you breathe it in and they stick into your lung. And then that constant irritation is what actually causes the cancerous situation to form. It can be painful, and I've taken care of people who experience this, and it's really a bad thing, and it can be a prolonged death also. So it's something you want to be aware of. And again, as Neil keeps telling you, we're not the experts on any of this, but it's about disclosure. And if you were showing a house and someone says, oh, this whole house has popcorn ceilings that were put in the 60s. Is this asbestos? Well, you don't know. I happen to have been taught that there was asbestos in some popcorn ceilings, but they can call an inspector in who takes a little, scratches just a little corner off, and then he tests it and tells them. So asbestos is a big deal. It really is. Thanks.
That's great. And it makes me think of what happens. Anybody ever touched insulation, fiberglass insulation, and you get
Ooh.
itchy afterward? And it's little
Yeah.
glassy fiberglass in your skin. So it makes me think of maybe that's what's going on with asbestos in the lungs. So that kind of a thing. It's good at. Radon, harder to detect, right? Really, it can only be tested for. This radon gas is coming up. And if you look at the map of the state of North Carolina and radon concentrations, there is a tendency for it to be greater in the mountains, but it's still here. And it's at the coast too, but it's really case by case. It could also be affected by how much water is in the ground. After a rain, the radon gas can't get up through the wet areas. It's going to be more concentrated, more focused on coming up through the houses because they don't have the water content under them that the outside lawns do. So when is the testing happening? Was it after a rain and therefore the levels are going to be higher? There's a magic number that we're looking for when they're testing for radon. Yep, the number one cause of lung cancer is radon. Gosh, consumer products is 3%, radon is 55%. So cigarettes is like the green part in this graph. Crazy. The magic number for our state, and maybe for the whole U.S., but definitely for North Carolina, is 4 picocuries per liter. What the heck is that? 4 little tiny particles of radon per liter of air, basically. That's what we're looking for. Don't worry about what a picocurie is. Just know the number is 4. If it shows from the radon test to contain 4 picocuries per liter of air or more, now it's a material fact that must be dealt with. How does the testing happen? A couple different ways. Could be these little radon test kits that you get for $50 at Home Depot. You would set it out for 48 hours probably, and then bag it up, send it off, and they'll tell you what the test came back at. When you hire an inspector to do it, they bring out a $1,000 plus machine like the one on the right. They set it up in a place that they're trained to know best place to put it. And it needs to sit there undisturbed for 48 hours. Over those 48 hours, every hour it's pulling an air sample. And then the report it's going to show after those 2 days is what was the average radon level across the 48 hours. If that average is 4 picocuries or more, now it's a material fact that must be dealt with, right? Now, I'm not confirmed, but I heard in Canada the magic number is 12. So I guess they're a little more sturdy than we are. But it depends on the area and what their requirements are for your purposes, for our purposes as brokers in North Carolina. The magic number is 4. The mitigation system is pretty much a process of pulling out the radon and spewing it outside of the house. You're pulling it up you're creating a thing to draw it in. This is like a cross section of a house. And where this yellow arrow's coming, that's the slab, that horizontal gray piece. They literally drill a hole, 3 or 4 inch hole in the slab. They empty it out. They clear it out maybe about 18 inches down. They put some rock in it. They put a PVC pipe down there. And so the radon just kind of gravitates to that point. They also attach a vacuum pump to create suction, sucking up air through this pipe. This pipe does not go straight up through the middle of the house like this drawing is showing. It looks like this. So this is a basement house. And on the right, you can see the basement window. This pipe is going down into the house and then going straight down through the basement floor into that hole I was talking about. And this device here that the red line is pointing at is the pump. It's a vacuum system. It's constantly sucking air up from that below the slab area and pushing it out the top. If you see on the left side, the rest of that system doesn't stop until it gets above the roof line. If it stopped below the roof line, there's a chance it could get right back in the house. So that's part of the remediation system, is to have this pump to connect the hole they've drilled through the slab and then run the exhaust all the way up above the roof line to ensure the radon is being pushed out into the air and not back into the house. If the power goes out, somehow this pump stops working, the system's not working anymore. So there's a couple of detectors there. It might be that the pump fails eventually. And there's this little gauge inside the house attached to the pipe. And it looks like sort of a thermometer, but it's like a U shape And if it's a certain shape, it tells you, okay, there's still suction going on, it's still working. Or if it's not there, you know, oh, the pump must not be working, need to have that repaired or replaced. So it's literally a suction system that is what they use for radon mitigation. You won't be tested on this, but just rule of thumb, and also not rule of thumb, but it just so happened in my experience, there was a 2,500 foot ranch house with a 2,500 foot basement that my buyers bought that had a significant radon level that down there. And I believe the cost for remediation was about $1,800, but you're talking about $2 or $3 grand, depending on the size of the house, maybe more. And as a broker, you would, depending on which broker you are, be collecting quotes from the different remediation companies and then figuring out, is the seller going to pay all of it? Is the buyer? In my case, they decided to split it. My buyer said, I'm not too worried about it. If they'll kick in 900, I'll kick in 900. But they could have easily been freaked out and said, I'm not paying a dime for this. The seller either pays for the whole thing or I'm out of here, right? Then it's just a negotiation issue. Formaldehyde is a foam insulation. It's pressed wood products might have it. Urea, formaldehyde is the official word, and it's hardening. As it's hardening, it's trapping gases. Could cause respiratory problems. In 1982, it was banned. So now it's just warned. It's warned against. There's just sort of a warning that it might be out and about there. Not at the same level for we as brokers to deal with as lead-based paint. If we know about it, we certainly would have to disclose it. We're not required to investigate. Oh boy, the big one. When I got in the business in 96, this was what everybody was talking about. Partly because of that whole synthetic stucco issue, which led to water getting inside houses and having time during which mold could form. Does this all just make us want to hold our breath? Look at this fan. This ceiling fan has a Tupperware lid on it. This was a flood victim house. This house was covered in water. And that's something that will happen in those poor flood areas. The insurance might cover the flood damage, but it doesn't cover the mold repair afterward. The insurance company, the big bad insurance company, is like, well, it's flood insurance. We fixed your flood damage, but the mold wasn't our fault. We're not covering the mold. So that really gets people in trouble. The remediation involves, it's another respiratory thing. The mold is living fungus that releases spores in the air, and some people are more sensitive to mold than others. May not even bother you, but it might put me in the hospital. There was a pastor I knew who took over a church. Come to find out, this old church had mold in the walls. He was gradually feeling worse and worse. Before they discovered the reason of it, he ended up in the ER for respiratory problems. He'd gotten so far toxified, I don't know if that's a word, the mold had inundated his bloodstream so much they had to have transfusions, multiple ones. He was sick. They didn't know what it was. Then they realized, wait, there's a leak. They opened up the walls. There was mold everywhere. He just so happened to have such a high mold sensitivity to that specific species of mold that he just about died from it. It took him 1.5 years after they figured it out to finally get fully recovered, because it was so penetrated into his body, into his blood by that point. Looks disgusting. It's scary looking. Black mold, doesn't matter what color it is. It just depends on how sensitive the person is to it. And there's lots and lots of different species. So if mold is an issue, you would have it tested. Oftentimes the standard home inspector will say, hey, I'm seeing, they won't use the word mold. They'll probably say fungal growth, signs of fungal growth. You should have a specialist come look at it. Now it's a mold inspector that needs to come look. There's another $500-600 just to come out there. Do they want to take samples and send them off to see what kind of mold it is? Now that's probably at least 3 samples. Got to take an air sample inside and outside to compare it to. That's 2. Do you want to know what it is? Then scrape that off. That's 3. So that's $100 per sample, at least, probably, just to give you an idea. It adds up quick.
I had a personal experience with this.
Yeah.
We had a condo. We had bought a condo and lived in it for a while. It was a stucco condo, and it was actually caused by the HOA because they ordered the building be pressure washed. But with stucco, you have to have the what is that, caulking
Yes.
to reseal.
It was probably
so,
synthetic
you know,
stucco.
when it connects.
Yeah.
And they didn't have that done, but they hired a pressure washing company to come in and pressure wash the stucco. It ended up causing a lot of mold, and they
Yeah.
kept blaming it. We spent so much money they blamed all sorts of stuff on the flooring, blah, 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 the patio, but we ended up hiring an environmental services company to come out and test, and they were structural engineers. We had to hire structural engineers to come
Wow.
out. It ended up, my lesson is never to buy a condo townhome with stucco because the HOA will always blame you and you spend so much money. And in the end, it still wasn't your fault, but it ended up they ended up paying $250,000 to get it recalled. Then other units realized they had the same problem. I don't know what happened after that, but we sold it very quickly once we remediated it and we left. And for a while, we kept getting nosebleeds and we
Wow.
couldn't understand why. But that was, I learned a lot from that lesson.
That's scary. When it's a mystery illness and it's attributed to this living stuff that you breathed in, that's terrifying.
Right.
Quite
And it was
likely.
very, very much so caused by the HOA
Yeah.
that ordered the work done. And, you know, they don't really know either. They're just board members that were, you
Sure.
know, on a thankless job too,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Probably synthetic stucco compared to hard coat stucco because that's known for having
Yeah.
moisture. That caulking is a hugely important part of that process, keeping that water out. You bet. Good example. So obviously you see any sort of sign of this stuff, red flag. The presence of mold, by the way, testable. The presence of mold is not a material fact. Neil, you just contradicted yourself. What are you talking about? The presence of mold is not a material fact. It's a certain amount of mold that becomes a material fact. Doesn't take much. The magic number is something like about a square foot. They call it an unusual amount in an unusual place kind of a thing. That's what makes it a material fact. But just the mere presence of a little bit of mold, maybe like less than a foot's worth, is not in and of itself a material fact. Just a little side note there. Keep that in mind. Here's how it looks on a microscope level. As we all shudder, it looks like broccoli, some of it, but it's lots of different kinds. It multiplies easily. It doesn't take much moisture content in the air for it to keep replicating. It takes a decent amount of moisture in the air for it to start. And I'm trying to think of the numbers. You won't be tested on these, and y'all could help me, Renee or Margie. I think the starting number might be around 20, 25% to get it going, get it growing. But then the maintenance level might be like 18 or 20, something like that. Percent of moisture in the air, like humidity level. So that's part of it too. When a mold problem arises and it's not like a water leak, it might just be too much moisture in the air. Like in a crawl space, you need to get those vents open. You need to put in a vapor barrier because a lot of evaporation from the earth is keeping it too wet down there. So therefore the floor joists have gotten mold, kind of a dust covering it. Could be gray or white or black. And the mold actually eats the wood over time. It causes, like Twee said, structural damage. That's why the structural engineer had to get involved, because the mold destroys the wood over time. So mold damage can cause wood rot, can therefore now be a structural issue. How long has it been happening? Once you combine these things, this is what mold needs to survive. It needs air, food, and moisture. And if it has all those in one spot, it's going to grow. And if it has that moisture at a certain level, thank you, Renee, that's a big problem. And then here's our flood note. If there's a flood issue, the homeowner's insurance may not cover that mold. They'll cover the flood damage, but the mold that happens afterward, like my friend, the toilet water supply leaked. It caused the ceiling downstairs to fall in, and she had some flooding. Well, that flooding got under control real quick, but by the time they could get around to it, the mold had started. And so it ended up being like a $60,000 job. It wasn't just, hey, let's towel up the moisture and then throw the ceiling back up, new sheetrock. The mold had to be remediated, which meant people in hazmat suits coming out and removing this stuff. It's a combination. How does the mold get removed? They use a vacuum system, a HEPA level vacuum system, like a very finely filtered vacuum system to remove it. It could also be a moldicide, like a killer, like not Clorox. Some people say just put some bleach on it. The bleach could also destroy the wood. It's got to be a certain kind of moldicide, mold killer formula that you put on there in combination maybe with the vacuum system, all while having respiratory protection. So the insurance agent needs to become involved. And we're talking about professional remediation as an idea, just for fun, not test. Probably basic remediation, $4 or $5 grand to start, unless you guys have other experience. Yeah, I'm seeing head nods there. Yeah, so it's a 4+ digit issue, at least. Another one that you'll run into with an older house is this guy, the underground storage tank, or UST. It doesn't take much for it to be considered an underground storage tank. It could pretty much all be above ground except 10% of it. And now it's got to be considered an underground storage tank. 10% underground or more, it's a UST. But quite often it's fully underground, especially like the 40s and 50s when they used oil. Oil, is it oil or oil? Which one is oil with no I? Which one's oil? I know my sister-in-law calls it oil, and I'm like, or did you just choke on something, or is that the way you talk? Anyway, so underground, you'll see some signs that there might be a tank, and that's where you as the broker need to put your red flag goggles on and look for this, the right picture. If you see these pipes poking up, maybe hidden by the azaleas in the flower bed next to the house, or even more of a hiding effort. Sometimes the owner knows that USTs are a problem, and that devious guy will dig around the pipe down a foot or so and cut them off under the surface and fill the dirt back up to try to literally hide the fact that there's a tank under there. It's an environmental concern. Is it still active? Maybe not, but is it rusting? And therefore, is the oil residue inside the tank coming through the rusted hole into the ground? Big issue now with removing the oil-soaked soil. So you see these pipes sticking up from the ground, that's what you're looking for. Certain ages of house or areas that might tend to have oil furnaces, you're going to want to start looking for this kind of thing, or asking the question, has this ever had oil heat? Sometimes you go in old houses and you'll see, like in the hallway, there's a grate on the floor, and you're like not wanting to step on it because you don't want to fall through, or you look in and there's maybe toys and stuff from over the years. That was probably an oil furnace type house that probably required a tank, and that tank might be buried, might be a UST. Or if it's wet, recently rained, and maybe some oil is in the ground, you'll see rainbow colors, like an oil sheen showing on the surface where the wet part is, or maybe some asphalt. Maybe it was a former store or a gas station or some sort of a commercial use that had tanks in the ground. The remediation here is to a couple things. You could either put like a media, like sand, some sort of a filler, so that's not that tank, if it rusts through it, the filler soaks up the oil and it also keeps it from collapsing. Or best practice, probably, and most expensive, is to dig it up and just pull it out of there with a bulldozer, with a backhoe, and get it out altogether. There's something called CERCLA, Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability. There's a lot packed into this acronym. It basically means if it's an environmental concern, the current owner, if they're the only one we can get our hands on, the government agency can say, then you're fixing it. Then you're paying to fix it. Oh, yeah, but it wasn't me. I didn't do it. The previous owner did. Well, they're dead, or we can't find them, or they're bankrupt, they're broke. You got money, you're the current owner, even though you didn't do it, but they did, you're fixing it. It's all under CERCLA, created in 1980 by the Environmental Protection Agency. There's the testable part, strict liability. The current owner is responsible for cleanup, in parentheses, even if the 2 owners ago is the one who did it. Big deal there. So, buyer wants to make sure this is handled before closing, because they become the current owner. Now they're the ones that are going to have to deal with it. All the more reason to make sure environmental things are handled before closing. Don't let them just close and deal with it later. Sometimes buyers want to do that because the momentum of the transaction is going so quickly. It's real tempting the week of closing for that buyer to overlook and give in on things because they don't want to change the moving schedule. They don't want to have to pay for 2 moves. All their stuff's on the truck already. The loan has been approved. They're just waiting to close and everybody's just antsy to get in. Got some issues like this. That's when you, the broker, step in and say, look, I know I'm spoiling the party, but this is a big deal. If there's some environmental thing, you could have to shoulder that burden, and we don't even know how much that could cost. It could be a lot. Way more than what you're in jeopardy of losing in your due diligence money if you choose to back out, but now's your chance. There are various environmental laws, depending on what part of the state you're in. Coastal area, where the fresh water meets the seawater, is a very delicate ecosystem. Fresh water, seawater combined. Therefore, there's a lot of rules surrounding that and what you can do for building. There's things like protecting against dredging and filling, meaning those folks living on the lake that have a dock, and maybe sometimes the water level gets down and they have a big fancy boat, but they can't put it on their dock because the water's not deep enough. They want to dig out the soil under the water. That's called dredging. That could be damaging to the environment. I knew an old rich dude one time who laughed and said, yeah, I needed my dock water out off my dock for my boat. It needed to be deeper. And there's a permit process. I didn't want to wait for it. So I went ahead and got the bulldozers and I dredged, and then they caught me and they charged me a fine, but I'd rather ask forgiveness than permission. That's the way he chose to handle it. I do not advise, but that's what we're talking about. Permits for dredging or filling that affects the little critters out there, maybe the flora and the fauna and the critters. Sediment Pollution Control Act, erosion control, buffer zones to keep that erosion from affecting like structures. And then here's our UST Cleanup Act, unauthorized cleanup and discharge. The current owner of any of these environmental things is going to be the first. If they can't find the previous owner who did it, or if that person can't afford to fix it, the current owner is going to be paying that bill. As brokers, we just need to identify the red flags. What is the environmental issue? Why is it dangerous? How do we fix it? How is it remediated? How does it affect our consumer, our customer, our client? I'm sorry, not customer, our client. And again, the biggest leverage you have is before closing. Make sure you get that stuff handled within due diligence, ideally, but definitely did it get fixed before closing so that your buyer is not the one who's footing the bill. Now we're going to have another break. Let's come back in 10. welcome back. Going to look at our old friend. The license, law, and commission rules. But first, let's look at the Relink book. Need to know some stuff out of that Relink book, guys. Need to know the basics of what's required to get your license. So let's do a review. We covered a lot of this on the first day. Hopefully you've been spending good time every week on this. This should all be review at this point. It all kind of starts with the comments section on the license, law, and commission rules, but let's go over the Relink stuff here. The process to obtain the license, you know that. You're taking this course. You'll pass this course, and then you're qualified to take the PSI course. So when you get your notification that you passed the class exam, you will apply to the Real Estate Commission. That costs $100. Then they will tell PSI that you're cleared to schedule your test with them. That costs $56. And you do so. You can do that online. It's all outlined here in this book. The process for taking the PSI online versus in person. I believe their testing facility is still off of Tyvola Road, but they have some across the state. If you happen to be at the beach and found a PSI testing facility, you could schedule to take it there too. Any testing facility or online. And there's guidelines. The online process is similar to our final exam for the class online process. They both require you to verify and prove, show that you're the only one in the room, that you don't have materials out. And our process for the final class exam, it's going to be facilitated by a company called Learn Test Pass, and they use a software called TallView. So you'll get an email with those names in it. And that email will say on the day of the exam, the 26th, you can log in. We'll give you a window. It won't just be a certain 4-hour period. It'll pretty much be all day, but not later than, I think we cap it at 9 p.m. because we don't want people running into the midnight cutoff because it is a hard cutoff. We want to give you time to do it, but you get anytime within that window, you can fire this off. And once you start it, it needs to be the whole process, right? You can't just start and stop all day long. The other thing is they will send you 2 different emails. One is the link to take the national portion. The other is the link to take the state portion. So we'll talk about it some more again, but you'll take the national portion first. You'll click on the link. They'll walk you through. Once you finish that, you'll close it out, and you have 10 minutes to start up the state portion, to click on the link from that email and take the state part. If you miss one, that's all of those questions that you'll get wrong, right? So just make sure that you pay attention there. You have to show your driver's license. They let you either hold it up to the camera or they let you upload the an image of it. From what I've been told from people who've experienced this, it's much smoother if you upload a picture of it than if you try to hold it up to the camera and let them try to recognize it, or let the robot try to recognize it. A lot simpler, and less chance of just frustration getting all that going to just upload a picture. What else? Don't forget, when you're taking the online version, you can skip questions. And then I'll talk to John Twee, but I think we'll start it. It'll be like maybe even as early as 5 a.m. or maybe midnight. It'll be something. It'll be some significant morning hour availability. But there's a skip button, right? So as you're going through, most questions you can probably narrow down to at least 2 possibilities instead of 4. And that already has increased your chances, right? But if you still just can't get there, it's real tempting to just be determined to get this thing right. Don't spend too much time on it. All the questions count for the same points, especially when you get to the math, like the big math questions that say, what's the total amount the buyer needs to bring, or what's the total amount the seller is going to get? They're probably going to be the last one in the math questions, but don't get caught up with those. You've got to answer like 6 different math questions in order to end up with that one right answer. So if math is the least bit shaky for you, or just in general, skip it. Come back to it later after you've answered a bunch of other ones that gave you some momentum. And again, don't forget, sometimes a certain question will spur something in your memory and help you answer the one that you got stuck on. But it's too late if you already answered it. So use the skip option to come back around to it. But don't forget to go back to them. It'll say you still have some answers, some questions left to answer. Let's see. By the way, when you pass this course, when you pass that final exam, this completion is good for 3 years. You can use this course as the education requirement to apply for 3 years. Not a great idea, but it's possible, right? Because you're basically going to have to refresh yourself if you go more than a few months. It's going to take a pretty significant cram course to get back up and running and get ready for that PSI, but it is allowable. Oh yeah, part of it is a criminal background check somewhere around that midterm period. You needed to, the date will be on the 26th, Eli. Test date is the 26th. Submit your application for a criminal background check. The cost and the time it takes depends on you. Depends on how many places you've lived, how many names you may have had. I've seen them cost $17. I've seen them cost 3 digits, $100, $150. I've seen them come back real quick in a couple of weeks, and I've also seen them where it took a little longer because they have to reach out to all those different places. If you're worried about what they might find, usually it's not a big deal. Like a DUI when you were 20 and now you're 30 or 40, they're probably not worried about it. The problem is that you didn't tell them. So if they ask you about convictions, don't assume they're not going to find it. That's a bigger issue than the conviction itself. The fact that you didn't admit to it is worse than the fact that you had it, right? And if some of you have friends who are thinking about getting in the business and they have like a really colorful, challenging past, and they're like, I'm just not sure if I could even get the license, there is an option called a petition for, what is it? It's a predetermination. Petition for predetermination. For $45, they can pay the commission to hear the situation and tell them, no, it's probably not even worth your time to go through the course because we would never approve your application. I doubt that's going to happen too much. Maybe if it's some elaborate fraud related thing, but I've been surprised in the education courses we've taken as instructors where we see case studies of people who were given licenses with quite an impressive backstory of something that just kind of got a little out of hand once upon a time. So don't just assume it. It's worth the $45 to see if it's worth their time. You're already all the way through this thing, so it's not going to help you much, but people might ask you, and that is a thing. Questions on the PSI exam, 80 questions on the national, plus a few questions that they're just trying them out, right? Because they're going to ask you some questions. You won't know which ones are which. Some of them are test development questions, and then 40 plus on the state section. On the PSI, you take the national first and then the state, just like we'll do in the class. Good question. Had a question. Do they look 7 years past or your whole life? In my understanding, they look through your whole life, through your whole maybe adult life perhaps, but I don't know for sure. I don't know of any sort of 7-year limit. How to allocate study time. Well, we know this already. The commission is who wrote the syllabus, and the commission is who writes the test exams, the exam questions. Don't forget, Learn Test Pass is the company we're using for your class exam, and they do offer some access to testable questions if you want to practice from their test bank. It's an option for you. You would need on the PSI exam at least a 71% or 57 correct answers on the national and 29 correct answers on the state, which is a 72.5. For the class, it's a 75%. So to pass the class exam Wednesday, you need at least a 75% or better. If you get a 69 to a 74, then you can reschedule to retake the exam without having to take the class over again. If you make a 68 or lower, then you're going to have to sit through the class again in order to be able to test again. So all these things we're seeing from the Relink book talk about the PSI. Once you get your application approved to take the exam, you have to do so within 180 days, meaning any retakes as well. There have been people that have said, yeah, I took the exam, I passed the national, but I didn't pass the state, or vice versa. Well, what happens then? You retake the one you didn't pass. You don't have to take the national again if you passed it once. You just have to retake the one you failed. It still costs the same. It's still $156 to retake every time, whichever one, if it's both or either one. And it's not unusual that some people maybe missed it by one question and have to try again. So don't feel bad if that's the case. It's pretty normal, pretty typical. Don't let that discourage you. I'd try again. I've had post-licensing students who they're pre-experienced. They might have tried like 4 or 5 times and then they finally nailed it. Each time I think you get better and better. I'll bet if they track these stats, I have a feeling that the first fail is worse than the second or the third or the fourth, right? So I think that's also a learning experience in and of itself. And then if we add these things up, I know it's a lot, and hundreds of dollars is certainly something that can mess your month up for sure. But we're talking, $500 for the course, $150 to retry. Maybe there's 3 retries. Now we're talking $1,000 you're out of pocket, and you've passed it. That's a pretty cheap entry fee to get into a field where you could easily make 10 times that on a pretty lower price point house. Not saying you're going to make that the first month, but you're going to make it back with the first sale, probably, right? So the numbers only matter if you're getting close to the limits, and that's quite possible and real. I get that, but let's keep it in perspective. The upside is much bigger than this upfront cost to get into this business. On the PSI, go for it.
With the PSI, I just want to prepare you because I wasn't. I let my South Carolina license, I just let it expire. And I thought I'll never need it again, but now I need it. But I want it for the school. So I had to go through that process, and I went to the PSI in person, which I like it in person better. It's a very formal, very specific atmosphere. And I just did this last August, so it's not old news. I want to prepare you for the fact that they are very serious. When you walk in, if you have a jacket on, you're going to have to take it off and go hang it up in a little corner. If you have long sleeves, they're going to ask you to pull your sleeves up. If you have pants, slacks, they're going to ask you to pull the slacks up to your knee. So all this they're doing so they can make sure you haven't written anything all over your body, because apparently people do. So I had no idea, because I hadn't really talked to anybody, that this would be such a kind of intrusive, situation. And so I really want to prepare you for that, because it can throw you off a little. So you're there, you're already emotional. You want to do this. I got to do it. I'm going to pass. You're trying to remember every single thing Neil said, and you're just high. All right. And then all of a sudden someone's saying, roll up your sleeves, roll up your pants. And you're like, what? So it's going to be that way. And the 2 ladies where I went to the PSI on Tybola. They were nice. They weren't rude, but it was all business, all of it. No, hi, how are you? Okay, honey, sit down. It's not like that at all. So be prepared. Don't take it personally. They're doing their job. Good luck.
I've heard the same for many students. They don't tell us what the test questions are. That's against the rules. The commission would really slap you hard about doing that. But they tell us that procedure, and I hear that time and again. So yeah, great advice. Don't bring anything in that you don't want to put into that room or hang up. You can't have it with you. So you may as well leave your phone in the car, for that matter. Your purse too. Just bring in your ID and whatever else, the bare minimum. They'll give you the list. They'll tell you exactly what the procedure is and what you're allowed to bring in. But you've got to comply, because I've been told, I've heard the term drill sergeant mentioned. It's sort of like that level of nice but firm, like she said. They'll give you 2.5 hours for the national, an hour and a half for the state. We know this part. Once you complete the PSI exam and pass it, the commission will give you a provisional broker's license on inactive status. You're still not able to sell houses just yet. You're getting closer. But what do you need to do now? Tell me in the chat. What do you have to do at this point? You have your provisional inactive broker's license. What's your next step if you want to get on into making money in this business? Yeah, pick a BIC. Affiliate with a firm. Sometimes people have already kind of interviewed around, thought about it, maybe laid that groundwork, and you may want to do that too. Sometimes people don't take the PSI right away. But again, just think about your own brain and how it works and how much of a filter is it? How much stuff is falling out of it? And how much time does it take for you to have to remember this stuff, retain this material? You might want to do it sooner than later. But I've had some students who during our time together in the class, they were talking, interviewing, and at least reaching out. Or maybe they already had somebody who said, I think you're a real go-getter. If you just get your license, I'll hire you. There's all kinds of different backgrounds I've heard there. Once you've picked a firm, that broker in charge will tell the commission that you're now affiliated with her. She'll send a form into the commission, an online form, and say, now she's with me. She's my provisional broker. I'm going to be looking over her shoulder. I'm going to be tuned in to her different transactions. They're also, by the way, when you're interviewing with them, they know what you want to hear, right? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of firms out there. I think, 12,000 firm licenses, I believe is the last thing I saw. A lot of those are onesies like me. I don't have anybody under me, but a good number of them hire people. Just keep in mind, they're going to tell you they'll train you, but you need to turn on your intuition and think, prove it. What do you mean by that? Can I talk to some other brokers? Can I get some idea of what that really means? Training in what? I want to be a commercial broker. Well, then you probably need to join a commercial firm if that's all you really want to do. Not that that's all. I'm just saying, if that's what you want to do, don't rely on a residential BIC to teach you commercial real estate. The commission doesn't even want a residential BIC who's never done commercial to be a BIC for commercial brokers because they don't have any point of reference. Yeah, that's good. See your training manual, policy and procedures manual. Another thing, you may not want to ask this outright, but you want to look at that policy and procedures manual because you want to see what happens if I leave. Might be that if you leave, you've risen up to like a 70% split, but they bump you down to 50 if you leave. Any outstanding transactions, if you choose to go away, maybe they bump your split down. All kinds of fun surprises when people start thinking about leaving firms. So pick a good one. Use all your big boy, big girl muscles in your brain and look through the sales pitch and see if what they're talking about sounds like what they're really going to deliver. In the syllabus, it's all divided into levels, as you already are fully aware of. The level 1 stuff is no less important. It's just less of it that you need to know. You don't have to interact and throw around what is the definition of real estate. You just need to know what the definition is, right? Not like the math. You need to be able to move around the math, interact with it. That's a level 3. So just keep that in mind as you're doing your review. There's some other resources out there. Again, still, if you run across something, you're curious if it's effective, run it by me. We'll tell you if we've had experience or heard about it, if it's a good resource, or if something you're seeing on some other practice exam somewhere else even makes sense. Let's get into the license audit commission rules, because this comment section is a big portion of where that state part of the exam is. We saw some material over our time together that said this is North Carolina, like joint tenancy. There was a little caveat about North Carolina and joint tenancy where Basically, it needs to be very specifically worded in the deed so as to accomplish whatever you're trying to accomplish by having a joint tenancy type of ownership instead of tenants in common. That could be a North Carolina question too, but the bulk of it is going to be license law, commission rule type stuff. It's 10 of the 40 questions, in fact, that's coming from this type of stuff in particular. There's some crossover. When we got into 7 and 8 agency, that crosses over with license law, commission rule because we started talking about willful and negligent omission and misrepresentation, things like that. Here we go. Number 1 question, and they keep making us ask this question in all the CE classes. You will never escape this question. They keep wanting you to confirm that you know that in order to make money in this business, you've got to have a license to do so. You do real estate for someone else for compensation. Whether it's fainting goats, Panther tickets, although they don't maybe have that much value these days. Sorry, Panthers. Poor Panthers. Oh, can we just have a moment of silence? Okay, that's enough. Poor millionaires. Maybe they'll be okay. Representing others for compensation while doing real estate. What is real estate? Sales, property management, auctioning requires a broker license, right? We also saw tell me more if that is that a question, Janina? Tell me more if that's a question. We also saw that there are such a thing as unlicensed assistants, and there's only so many things that an unlicensed person that you hire to assist you are allowed to do. They can't do things requiring a license. It might be tempting to say, hey, unlicensed assistant, go get on the phone, go talk to a bunch of potential cold call sellers and try to get me a listing appointment. But that's tricky because they're probably going to have to talk about things that require a license to do that. Therefore, you're going to need to hire a licensed assistant if you want somebody to go make cold calls for you to generate business. Oh, interesting. Wow. Yeah, different firms have sometimes interesting rules. Some firm policies might say, if you ever want to be a property manager, don't do it through us. We don't want to do that. The last firm I was with before my own, he didn't want to mess with it. He didn't do it. It was a whole other can of worms. And he said, nobody in my firm, I will not be the BIC for a property manager. In other words, if you want to do property management, you can start your own firm to do property management and do your sales through me. That's a possibility. You could be a part of 2 different firms with those BICs awareness, as long as they know. Sometimes people go out to Wilmington for the summer and come back here for the winter, and they are affiliated with the firm in Wilmington for those 3 or 4 months, and they're affiliated with a different one here. And as long as those BICs know about it, that's okay. Or it could be like that guy that I just mentioned. I could have started my own property management firm, and I did my property management through my own deal, but then I did my sales through his firm. So that's allowable. There's only one license. Once upon a time when I got my license, it was a salesperson's license, and then you would get a broker's license. That's gone now. Now it's all a broker's license, and then it's 2 phases, so to speak. There's a provisional broker, there's a full broker. And then out of the full broker crowd, you can become a broker in charge. So that's another type. You can also be what's called BIC eligible. You're not a broker in charge, but you're ready to be one with just the filling out of a form online. You're that close to becoming BIC at any given moment. But you have to do the same thing to become BIC eligible as you would do to become a BIC. What are those things? We're getting kind of out of order here, but I'm just throwing stuff out at you at this point. You would take a course, a 12-hour BIC course, broker in charge course. I think it costs like $120, $110. It's online, given by the commission. We as real estate schools cannot give it. The commission requires that they give it only. They also are the ones who give you the trust account course. If you decide to have a trust account in your firm, or if you're in charge of a firm trust account, you need to take the trust account course, and it is the commission who gives that course. So the BIC course is for both people who want to become BICs or just BIC eligible. You could be a BIC eligible person and never ever become a BIC. Why? Why would you become BIC eligible without even really wanting to become a BIC or never even doing so? In the chat. Why be BIC eligible? It's nice for a firm to have a backup, especially these smaller firms. So if you have a firm and the broker in charge is over, let's say 5 provisional brokers, and that's it, the only non-provisional broker is the BIC, she better be on top of things, because if she has a bad couple of weeks and forgets the June 10th CE deadline and therefore wakes up on June 11th, she's going to wake up on June 11th and remember that she missed her deadline for CE. She's still okay from the 11th through the 30th, but on July 1st, she will become inactive and all of her provisional brokers will lose their eligibility to sell real estate. They are going to become inactive too. It would be nice if she had another provisional full broker in the firm in that moment, sometime between the 11th and 30th, when she realizes, oh no, that she could say, oh, you're BIC eligible. Let me hand the reins over to you for a little while until I get my mess cleaned up. Then I'll take back control. And it's just a matter of filling out an online form if you're BIC eligible. So that's just a good practical thing to be. And it's also, if you ever choose to start your own firm, you need to declare a BIC for your firm if you set up an entity. Therefore, nice to go ahead and just have that eligibility. So once you've done your post classes, that's the first priority, right? As a brand newly licensed provisional broker, whether you're active or not, by the way, you've got to finish 3 post classes within that's the old one, within 18 months. 3 post classes within 18 months if you're a provisional broker, even if you're not active. I've had plenty of post-licensing students that were not active. They just wanted to go ahead and get all the education out of the way before they activated. Good question, Jennifer. Once you take that BIC course to become BIC or BIC eligible, it does indeed last forever as long as you never go inactive. But that is an important caveat. Long as you maintain your BIC status or BIC eligible status, how do you maintain it? You just take a BIC CE instead of a general update course. It's just a little bit of a different kind of CE update course. Everybody who's not a BIC takes what's called Gen Up, general update. But if you're BIC or BIC eligible, instead of the Gen Up, you take a BIC update course. Pretty much the same content, except for about 20 minutes worth of BIC related material. No different costs. After the 12-hour course, there's really no extra cost for being BIC or BIC eligible. But if you do miss that CE deadline some year or for some other reason, let your license go inactive, then once you get reactivated, you're active again, but you're not BIC or BIC eligible again. You've got to take the 12-hour course again. That falls off. That'd be a way that you could lose it if you go inactive. So we're initially provisional brokers. Then we get rid of that provisional status by taking those 3 post classes. How many hours for those post classes, by the way? 90 total. 3 classes at 30 hours each. You bet. You can take them in any order. 301, 302, 303. Doesn't matter what order. They're basically deep dives into what you've been learning in pre. So 301 is a deep dive into agency for the most part. We really go detailed look at the listing agreement, the buyer agency agreement, the working with agents brochure and disclosure process. The 302 has more math in it because it is talking about closing procedures and contracts. So we dig into like the contract stuff. What is an acceptance? What is acceptance and communication, as well as all that closing math, those big questions. And in the post classes, remember, as a pre-licensing student, every month has 30 days. For post, we're back to normal, real life. You've got to know, well, they actually do tell you which months are which, but you do have to do the math in terms of February versus March being 31 days and April being 30 days, that whole thing. Yes, there is an exam for post, But what I'll tell people on the first day of post is, remember when you were a pre-student and you were all about passing that exam and it was so much pressure and it was like, is this on the test? This was not that. So in the post class, it's more discussion based. We do more case studies and we actually have some more talk. We have time for it. That's actually part of the required curriculum. And so the tests aren't at the same level as the pre-tests. They are tests that you have to pass, but it's not like this one. It's not like quite so stressful, because we do a real good job of covering the material that you're going to be tested on in those end of post classes. Not as big of a deal.
Can I give a shameless advertisement?
Oh, sure.
You take your final exam here, you pass it, pass your state exam, and we are offering a wonderful program where we're bundling all 3 of your post classes. You can get 2 finished by the end of December. The 3rd one probably will be in January. And there you go, you have it. And this is how I explain. Pre is all the why. Why do we do this? Why do we do that? We have to have the definitions. Post is how you do it. So remember, bundling, you'll save $100, and our wonderful Neil is teaching them all.
It's me again. Thank you, Margie. You could be a full broker and never be BIC or BIC eligible. That is certainly the case with many people. But that is the process if you did want to do so. And then if you do want to start your own firm at some point, quite likely you would start out being the broker in charge for that firm, at least for a little while, until you had enough money to hire someone else to do it if you wanted to keep listing and selling yourself. So it might even be kind of inevitable for you eventually. So testable, provisional broker status, that's temporary, right? Only lasts for 18 months. You've got to, if you don't get those classes done within the 18 months, your license goes back inactive, right? What if you're already inactive, you never activated, but you went past the 18 months? It's going to require more of you to become active. And you can find that out from the commission as depending on your duration of being inactive as to how much it's going to require to get active again. We talked about all this fun stuff. As a provisional broker, another important part is you have to be hand in hand with that broker in charge. You need to keep them apprised. When the real estate commission does an investigation because maybe someone complained about you, or they might be doing an investigation about another broker who was on the other side of the transaction from you. It's not your fault, but you're in the periphery. Therefore, they want to hear from you too, or they want to see your files too. But if you're the subject of the investigation, you're going to get something called the brown envelope, but it might be like an email. And they'll say, look, you've got 14 days to tell us your side of the story and provide the relevant documents we're asking for. That's not a fun email to get. That means that they're looking at you about something. You're going to, as a provisional broker, if you get it as a provisional, call your BIC and you'll say, I got the big brown envelope, and your BIC might say, oh no, what did you do? Or they might say, I know you did. I got one too, because I'm just as liable as you are. What did you do wrong? If they have to ask what you did wrong, then they might be part of the problem. They should know what sorts of things you've been involved with that might cause problems. That's the level they need to be involved with you in your transactions. You need to be confiding in them. You need to be consulting them with everyone. They need to know if there's a problem. And some firms say, you know what? Yeah, okay, I'm your BIC, all you provisional brokers, but I don't want to drag this out for 18 months. Some firms might have a policy that say, you've got 6 months. You better get your post done within 6 months. And they require it as a firm policy because they don't want to have all those people out there, all those provisional brokers out there able to potentially do something crazy, or not even so crazy, but still have a complaint that BIC now has to answer for, along with the provisional. The BIC may not know anything about the situation, but they still have to answer for it, and they might be held accountable to certain levels. And then once you become non-provisional, that BIC likes you more. I'm just kidding. No, they're more at ease because it's more on your shoulders, right? They're like, oh, whew, so I don't have to worry about this one maybe quite so much. If they get the envelope now, at least I don't have to go to Raleigh with them. I don't have to go to the hearing with them because it's on them because they're non-provisional. You're able to act independently if you want to. As a non-provisional, you can start your own firm. You can go out on your own if you want to, but you're individually accountable. You will still need a broker in charge when you're non-provisional. There are 3 cases in which you need a broker in charge if you're doing any advertising. Well, that even means having business cards. Any sort of action where you're telling the world that you do real estate is considered advertising. So that requires that you have a BIC. If you have licensees under you, requires that you have a BIC. What's the other one, Margie? I'm just blanking on this third one. I don't have it in front of me. Licensees under you. Advertising. I'll get to the slide in a minute, or think of it in a minute. And there's one more. So you need a BIC in all 3 of those cases. Broker in charge, we know about this. The broker in charge is certainly over the provisionals, but they're also in some degree over the rest of the brokers too. They are still held responsible to make sure the advertising is done right and the supervisory stuff. And if there's a trust account in the firm, it is on their shoulders to make sure that's handled. They're probably not dealing with the trust account on a daily basis, especially the larger firms. They're probably delegating that to an office administrator, but the BIC is still responsible for making sure that office admin does it right. They want to check that monthly reconciliation of the statement, make sure they did it right. Because a couple things with regard to a trust account, you could mess up and end up with too much of your own money or the firm's own money in the account. And that would be the firm's money plus the client's money in the same account. And now we have this big bad word. What's that big bad word? Starts with a C. When you mix your money with your client's money. There it is. Commingling. Bad. Don't do it. Now, it could happen accidentally, sort of, because these checking accounts called trust accounts, you would have a checking account made into a trust account. You will know it's a trust account. The whole world would know because the check would say so. It has to say a label on the account, trust account. But we'll take our break in just a second. But you've got to pay for that privilege. Those checking accounts cost money. And you're allowed by commission rule to have as much as $100 of your own money in the trust account so as to pay for it when those bills come due to be charged for the checking account. So if you're not paying attention and it's an interest-bearing trust account, because that's also allowed, you could have your money in the trust account collecting interest. It's like you could like double your money in 3 months. I'm just kidding. Not at all. It's not at all a profit structure. It's just the way it is. But you could have interest bearing. And that's a great other question, Jennifer. No, I'm so glad to report that you do not have to have a trust account because I don't want one. And many times in the business, you will write up the offer to purchase and you'll tell that other agent, well, I wrote it up because we don't have a trust account. Your firm's going to have to hold the money in your trust account. And that other agent will say, well, we don't have one either. Firms are more and more frequently not having trust accounts because of that reason. You don't really make much money on the interest, and it's just one more thing you have to do to maintain and reconcile every month. Also, if you are earning interest and you had like the $100 in the account of your own money to pay for the fees and the interest bumped it over, well, now you've commingled. That's why you need to keep a watch on it, keep monitoring it, and make sure that you have enough buffer in there so as not to have issues. I don't want to take the trust class. I don't want to maintain the account. I did it the first time I had my own firm 20 years ago. Didn't know better that I didn't have to have it back then, but I did find that out in the meantime. So this time around, I said, no, thank you. I might have said other words too, but I basically said, not having a trust account for me, please, and thank you. So no, firm does not have to have one. Let's take our break. We'll keep on talking about license law, commission rule. Welcome back from the last break. We have one more hour to go, not even quite that. Let's take a little side street here, clean up some little points together. And we're going to talk about, drum roll please. This guy. Need to talk a little bit about the square footage guidelines, but first, let's look at the, okay, good. Same thing. Let's look at what the syllabus says about it. It's from chapter 8. We talked about agency in chapter 8. We did talk a little bit about how square footage is not a material fact. Square footage is not required to be reported by the Real Estate Commission. This is highly testable. Does the commission require square footage? Is it a material fact according to the Real Estate Commission? No. It is not. But what the commission does care about is if you do choose to report it, it is done accurately. So does that mean that we don't report square footage if we don't want to? No. Because if we're going to use the MLS to market the property, then we have to use square footage because the MLS says so. And therefore, since we have to use square footage, the commission cares, and they say, well, then it better be accurate. Testable. Is square footage a material fact? Oh, thank you. Thank you. Let me fix that little nuance. Let's see here. Is square footage a material fact? No, it's not. But if you do report square feet, it must be accurate. Okay. As brokers, we need to know have the expertise to measure and calculate and report square feet. There's a book for that. It's this one we're going to look at in just a moment. It's in your Google Drive, Residential Square Footage Guidelines. But first, let's finish with the syllabus here. We as brokers, we saw in the slides, but we're looking at the syllabus, and I hope you've been looking at the syllabus as much as you've been looking in your book. We should not rely on what the owner tells us the size is. Obviously, we would not even rely on the blueprints. Wait a minute. The blueprints, but they're like official. Blueprints were made by an architect. That cost a lot of money. Doesn't matter. Did they end up building it to the blueprints? Is it really the size the blueprints said it would be? We got to deal with reality, not the promise, not the initial, hey, here's what we're thinking we're going to do, right? So a broker should not rely on blueprints. Tax records, of course. Tax records are the worst possible thing to rely on because they are frequently wrong, and we want them to be wrong as property owners because usually they're wrong to our benefit. They're telling a lower square footage than there really is, and we're paying taxes on that lower value from the lower square feet. And it might have been accurate once upon a time, but it might have grown into something that's less accurate, or the owner didn't get a permit on that addition, and so the taxing authority still thinks it's 2,000 feet, but it's now 25. So the tax record is not accurate. Don't rely on that as a broker. And don't rely on the MLS. Don't look back in the history from when it sold 2 years ago and use what that person did. They might have even shown a sketch. They might have paid someone to measure it back then. Don't rely on that number. Get your own stuff done. You are on the hook as the broker, as the listing broker. You are on the hook for proper, accurate square footage. If you're a buyer's agent, it is expected that you have it is reasonably expected that you can rely on the reported square footage that the listing agent put in there. However, you've got to have enough professional expertise to note significant differences. If it's actually 2,200 square feet, but they tell you it's 26, the actual number that the commission would care about for there to be a difference in real versus measured, 5%. 5% or less of a differential, and the commission is like, okay, that's sort of a tolerable difference. But you need to have enough professionalism, reasonable skill and care to detect if it's more than that. And that sounds scary because you guys have not maybe looked at houses with an agent's eye. None of you have. You're not agents. That's why you need to look at a lot of houses, right? You got nothing else to do in the beginning. Sure, you need to find clients, but also go preview houses. Sometimes firms will get listings, and whatever listings they accumulated in a given week, when they have a sales meeting, they will all tour. I don't know if that's still a thing. I haven't done it in so long. They would caravan and go look at the company's listings that they accumulated for the previous week or two. That's a great thing to do as a new agent. You could also just go look at a lot of new construction, see what the square footage is, see how that feels. 2,000 feet in a 1950s ranch home feels way different than 2,000 feet in a 2022 ranch home. There are fewer walls today. There's more open space. Feels bigger today. Even if it's bigger in the older house, every room having like basically 3.5, 4 walls with a door in between feels a lot smaller. So get good at it, practice it, go look at a lot of houses. You could even pick some houses in a neighborhood that you like. You could schedule to preview those listings. You could say, I'm not showing it to anybody, but I just need to preview this listing. You might want to try to do that on vacant homes so as not to inconvenience sellers, but those are all possibilities, right? And then don't forget my other little advice here. In terms of practicing your valuation skills, your valuing skills, pick something in a neighborhood that you would love to be the predominant listing agent in, where you want to just learn the ups and downs, every single thing about it. Pick one that's under contract. I would say active, but if you pick one that's under contract, you won't have to wait as long to find out what it's sold for. Pick one that's under contract and go ahead and do your own CMA, because as an under contract listing, they don't report what the contract price is. They can't, because if it were to fall through, you would have disclosed what that seller was willing to take. So do your own CMA and then put a little notifier to check back in 30 days, see what it actually sold for, and see how good you were. So those are ways you can practice this thing. So get good at square footage. As a new agent, probably not a bad idea to not be the one who measures it. Even though you're responsible for it, maybe pay the $100, $150 for that listing to get measured professionally. By the way, I did that the other day, but I was kind of surprised that the person who they sent out to measure it wasn't an appraiser. I was kind of thinking that anytime you paid for a professional measurer, they were going to be someone who does a lot of measuring. This was a person who only had their license for like 2 years. And I'm not saying he did a bad job. He did fine. But I kind of was expecting it to be like a multi-year, many experienced, highly experienced measurer. And that's what I want to pay for. If I'm paying $150, I won't hire him again. No offense to him. I just want to, if I'm still responsible for the number they report, it's going to be somebody who's better at it than me. And I don't think he was better at it than me. Just for my own personal liability reasons. We did some calculation. We can revisit that next time because the math kind of eats up some time. And I also have, don't forget, on the YouTube channel, I've got lots of individual calculation videos. If you go back to the early videos, they're in like usually a full color thumbnail, purple or blue or whatever. And I've got those there for you to kind of follow along with, where I've narrated it. Now, here's the guidelines. We're going to look through those guidelines in a second. It's about exterior measurements. When you see that the house has 1,800 square feet that's reported, it includes the brick thickness and the stud thickness and all the guts that you can't see, where the electrical and the plumbing pipes are running, because you basically pull a measuring tape over the entire exterior. That is the square footage. And that's, that amount of wall thickness around the whole house, that counts for a decent chunk. So 1,800 square feet is not 1,800 square feet of airspace. It's not painted surface to painted surface. It's outside of home siding to outside of home siding. And literally, when you measure a house yourself, you start on the outside. You pull the measuring tape from corner to corner outside. You better wear your outside shoes or have different shoes than the ones you wear inside, because you're going to be tromping around through the flower bed, right? pulling the tape and then trying to do some geometry to figure out how much these rectangles and triangles add up to. And then there is a differentiation between above grade and below grade. Below grade meaning anything where if you were to go through the wall, you'd be into the ground. Above grade, you'd be into the air, right? And then what is the criteria for heated living area? Well, let's take a look at this thing. Here's the book. And you can actually get this book like a real book that you can touch, tangible. But this is the PDF, same stuff. And they've got some handy illustrations. First of all, they talk about heated. Notice it didn't say cooled. We're reporting HLA, heated living area, as opposed to non-heated square feet. In the multiple listing service, we have to differentiate. It says which thing it is. And as I multitask, you'll see why I'm multitasking here in a minute. I'm not checking my Instagram, I promise. Not really multitasking either, because I'm kind of trying to do this. Hang on a second. Here we go. Okay, let me show you this thing. I'm going to show you an actual listing. Here's what it looks like on the square footage portion of the MLS entry. HLA for heated living area, right there in blue. And they've got it compared to non-HLA or not heated living area square footage. In this case, this house has none that is not heated. It's all heated. And then they've got, depending on the house, is it a main level, upper, third level, lower level, or basement? What's the difference between upper and third and lower? It depends on the style of house. If it's a tri-level or a split level, you might call it a lower level, a main level, and an upper. If it's a 3-story home, then you'll use the third level option. And then they differentiate for basement, both heated living area in the basement and non-heated. They might have only finished part of the basement, and you have to differentiate. You have to be very clear how much square footage is in which type of the property. And then they've specified this is 2,822 feet above grade. Let me see if I can find one that is a mix. Highland Creek has some basement stuff. We might get lucky. Here's one that's got some non-HLA square feet on the main level. 197 feet is not heated. The main level has 1,225. The upper level has 1,527. See if I can get lucky. I'll do it this way. I'll get it this way for sure. Basements only, please. I got some. I wanted more of a variety, but at least here they show the main level and the basement level. Got 297 non-heated in the basement. Not much going on down there. It's a smaller house. So that's kind of how it looks in the wild. Let's take a look back at the book. Here we go. Heated versus finished. Finished is acceptable for interior construction. Sheetrock and drywall is finished and painted. There's flooring. Look at this one. This is sort of testable item here. Ceiling height of at least 7 feet in order for it to be considered finished. At least 7 feet. What if it's 6 feet 4 inches? Well, that better only be because there's duct work or something. But as long as most of it is 7, then you can count the entire room as living area. A couple other little nuances here. It's considered, you've got to differentiate if it's a situation where it's like a 2-story house, but there's a room over the garage that you can't get to unless you go into the garage and up the stairs. In other words, you can't get back and forth from the main 2-story level to the garage part level. Even though that's heated as well, you can't report that in the full main HLA. You got to show the main HLA is 2,800 feet. There's an additional 400 heated living area over the garage. You have to differentiate that you have to go through some unheated space in order to get to that other part, right? It's basically full disclosure. Just make sure people, otherwise, you know what people would do. If it weren't a requirement, they would say, oh, this is a 3,000 foot house. Yeah, kinda, but it's 2,600 in the 2-story and then another 400 over the garage that you have to go through the garage to get to. You better believe in a sales business, we would make it look better than it really is, right? That's kind of what we do. There's a difference between fluffing and fraud. Fluffing is seasonal water view. When the leaves are off the trees, you can see the water. And that's kind of okay, but you wouldn't be able to call it that if you have to be on the roof, on an extension ladder with binoculars to maybe see some water. That's now more than just fluffing when it comes to reporting things. Below grade, they make a note here. A basement is defined as below the entry level of the dwelling, accessible by a full flight of stairs. Here's the gist of it when it comes to the stairs. Here's how the stairs work. Oh, here we go. We'll do this. You just won't get to see my face this time. I'm sorry. Poor you. So sad. Here's how the stairs work. So we have a good old 1960s ranch, just a nice rectangle. We have stairs in the middle. And that's how we get to the upstairs level. Those stairs require there to be a hole in the floor upstairs, don't they? Right? The second level floor has to have a hole so that these stairs can get up through there. But it doesn't matter. For purposes of measuring square feet, and this is a 2-story home, you're going to take a tape and measure it around the exterior of the house and multiply by 2. Even the part under the stairs. And so if we're looking at a cross section of the stairs that looks like this, terrible stairs, sorry. Here's our little closet door. And you know, this part, you can't get to this part. It's completely inaccessible. It maybe even has a wall here. And if you did need to access it, you'd have to be on your hands and knees. Doesn't matter. For purposes of measuring square feet, even this part under the stairs is lumped in to the square footage. You with me? So just consider the part under the stairs as well. In this case, super simple house, you would say, oh, 1,800 feet around this whole thing, and it's also got a second level, then that's 2 of them. That's 3,600 square feet when it comes to just the stairs themselves. There might be some other issues that would affect the size on the rest of the house. Like maybe it's this kind of situation. Maybe there's like a utility closet off to the corner that has a door that you can only access it from the outside, and it's not heated. It's non-HOA, HLA. So you would have to calculate all of this square footage and then figure out, oh, this is a 6 by 5 foot closet. Well, that's 30 square feet. So it's 1,800 feet if you measure the whole perimeter minus 30. Well, that attacked me. So the total HLA here would be 1,770. And because of this, because you have to pull that part out. Another thing, if we look at a cross view of a of like a bonus room over a garage, sorry, where the ceiling does one of these, and that's the floor. Let's say the owner finished this all by themselves, and they chose to just carpet the floor all the way from corner to corner. Even though this is the 5 foot mark, it's 5 feet from the sloped ceiling down to the floor right here. Well, the owner may have chosen to leave all of this finished as well, even in this area, but you can't count it. For the purposes of measuring the square feet, the only thing you can count is the part of the floor that's 5 feet from the ceiling. And so you'd basically be measuring this part. However much that is, you couldn't count these little pieces down here. That's in this square footage guideline as well. How you handle a sloped ceiling bonus room. So there's that. That's testable. The 5 foot mark there. The other thing is the ceiling height. This cough drop has bones in it. Sorry. The ceiling height, at least 7 feet in order for it to be considered finished. If you've got some pipes or some duct work, and that's temporarily or a little bit that's 6 feet 4, that's okay too. But as long as the majority of this room is at least 7, you can count the whole room square footage. What else? Let's take a look back at the book. Here we go. Oh, the stairs, by the way. Back to the stairs again. So yes, even the hole in the second floor that the stairs need to access through counts. So you just count the whole thing under the stairs. But what if it's one of those fancy foyers? It's like a 2-story. I don't know if I can draw this in 3D. But you've got like a staircase coming down. But it's also got more open area. This is a terrible drawing. There we go. Here we go. So let's say you're laying on the floor looking up at the ceiling. And here's where the stair hole is. That the stairs would come up. But then there's also this nice extra area so that you could stand upstairs in that hallway and look down at the front door. Like a 2-story foyer. All of the part that the stairs could not accordion up into, if you were able to just to push them up and fill up the stair hole portion, all of the part that's still remaining uncovered or open, you cannot count, obviously. If you can't walk on it, then you can't count it. So you need to subtract this part out. Falling apart. Okay. Bay window. You count the bay as long as it has at least 7 foot of clearance, headroom. You would have to measure that. So if you're making your way around the house, and you make your little drawing, and here's your bay window, you're basically going to have to measure it, and it's going to be 2 triangles and a rectangle that you would add together. But you can't forget about it, because the house that you pulled and tape around, all of this is 1,800 feet. You got to add the part for the bay window as well. This makes me emotional. Square footage is emotional. There's some handy diagrams. Let's see, where is that one part of this thing? Here's a little note in the book that says agents must be accurate, must accurately report the square footage. And then I'm looking for that part that says 5%. I think it's in the first few pages down here on the left. I'll find it later. They go through some diagrams that are useful, and it kind of shows you how you might actually do it in real life. You would make a diagram, at least of the exterior. You don't have to do interior space. But they're pointing out the 7 foot and then the 6 foot if it's a duct. And then you would measure the garage and the carport, but you would report them, of course, not as heated living area. The stairs are over here, and they're pretty much ignored. You're just assuming even the space under the stairs is also what you're allowed to count. And that didn't always used to be the case. You got to deduct for the part under the stairs once upon a time, but that's not the case anymore. And then you just make your little list and add up the numbers. Certainly on a rectangle, it's not that hard. And even on a 2-story, this isn't the worst thing in the world. They've got a angled slope ceiling situation here. So they're noting the 5-foot ceiling height part. You're not allowed to count the part below that, just like we mentioned. And here's a good diagram of the stair hole being bigger than the stairs themselves. So you've got this L-shaped hole, even if the stair part were closed in, you could see down to the first level, and therefore you have to pull that part out. That's the open space in this case is 120 square feet that you would not be able to count because you can't walk on it. This case, pretty much the same stuff. So they have an unfinished furnace room on this one. You would measure it and then not include it in the HLA. This main level has a garage built in, so you would measure it and then not include that. Whatever the full amount is, you would subtract that. What is that, 27 by 22? And there's a little bit here. You may already be at the point where you're like, no thanks, I don't want to do that. But we haven't even gotten into some crazy shaped houses yet. There's some really elaborate houses that could be a bear to measure. And then sometimes these older houses, like these tri-levels or split levels, have an overhang, another 2 feet over on the top level that is not on the bottom level. You have to account for that. And then if it were one of those tri-levels that, I'm looking to see if there's a diagram here. If this were the kind that also has a lower level that goes down into the earth a little bit, you would have to separate and say this part on this lower level is a little bit below grade. So you couldn't count that as the main HLA too. You have to specify, look, some of this is lower level, below grade. I think that's about the gist of your square footage measurement test coverage. And for a condominium, you're only measuring painted surface. That's a big difference for condos. You're not including the wall thickness for a condo. In fact, when you're on a house and it's a bonus room, you can't levitate into the air. You're probably not going to get a ladder. Nobody requires you to get a ladder. And that would even be ridiculous anyway. You can't necessarily pull tape around the outside of this house, right? Most of it is slope ceiling, so you would measure it from the inside, but as you're measuring it from the inside of this bonus room, you need to add in 6 inches for the thickness of the walls, right? So you would measure airspace, painted surface to painted surface from inside the room, add another foot because there's 2 exterior walls in addition to that surface, right? It gets a little tricky, and you've got enough to worry about as a brand new agent. So probably good practice to hire it done and then go meet them there and watch them do it and learn from a professional. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, good point. Thank you in the chat. We pay for everything, guys. We as the listing agent have the privilege of listing this house in residential. In commercial, sometimes the client, especially if it's a big ticket item of advertising or big something significant, you might have some sort of a budget, but certainly in residential, there's too much competition. Agents will pay for things. So you're paying the $150 to measure this thing. You're paying for the professional photos if you don't want to do it yourself, if you need to do it and provide professional. Sometimes I'll take my own. It's case by case, whatever best serves the property and the client, and the time. If I have 14 listing appointments to go to, then taking pictures is not a high dollar productive activity for me. But if I got nothing else to do, it might be something to do, especially in the interest of time to get it on the market sooner, might be an option. Here's a typical one where I would not want to measure it because I don't want to do an octagon shape, right? As a buyer agent, you don't need to worry about the measuring unless you detect something off. But if you're really worried about it, and if it's really crazy, you might want to go ahead and pay somebody to measure just so that you have that to kind of lean on. But you're still leaning on somebody that's good at it, better at it than you. But look at all these numbers. It's so easy to miss one to the point where you're more than 5% off, right? You're making your way around. Then here's the real world of it. You probably have a clipboard or a notebook and it's getting smudges of dirt because you're tromping through the flower bed, picking up your tape measure that got dirty as you're rolling it back up for the next go around. Or you have an iPad and you're trying to write on that and it's messy. And what you end up with is this messy scrawled off diagram that you now have to go back and think, wait, was it 23.7 or is that a 28? It gets complicated. It gets a little difficult. So get some training on it. The worst case scenario, at the very minimum, go with people to measure it and see what that is like in real life. Okay, back to our slides. Talked about brokers in charge. We know how to become one. We know how to become a BIC eligible person. There's this other kind of broker license that applies not to residential, but instead to commercial. It's called a limited non-resident commercial broker's license. There's not very many of those. I think there's only a couple of hundred of them. I know this because the commission sends out a bulletin every month and it shows the breakdown of all the broker licenses. It also shows the disciplinary action. It's the same publication. So I like to kind of see how many brokers are out there and kind of monitor that sort of thing. Sorry, guys. Here we go. Okay, there we go. And here it is. Limited non-resident commercial broker license. This is about commercial brokerage because a commercial company, a company who wants to expand into North Carolina or across the country, they don't want to have a broker for every state. It lets them have their own real estate department, send somebody to North Carolina to do the real estate needed to expand whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish in real estate. Now, it's got to be someone with an active license in the state they're coming from. It's got to be only for commercial, not residential. There is no limited non-resident residential broker license, not a thing. They must have an agreement with a North Carolina firm so that they know what rules to follow. They're not just allowed to come in here like the Wild Wild West and do whatever they're used to doing back in their state. They've got to have a North Carolina broker who is responsible, basically like a BIC for North Carolina for them to help them not break our rules and laws, since they are here doing real estate without a North Carolina license. But they're allowed to in this case because of this. They have a license, but it's called a limited non-resident commercial broker's license. They have a supervising firm who is a North Carolina firm. And that's it. That's really all you need to know about this limited non-resident commercial broker license possibility. When you start your own firm, you could choose to be a sole proprietor, but if you choose to operate it as an entity, LLC, LLP, subchapter S, or a C corporation, you go to the North Carolina Secretary of State website, do a name search for that brilliant name that you thought up that you think is just the most creative thing ever, and see if someone else has used it. And if it's available, you lock it down. And you start your entity through the Secretary of State. They give you an SOS number, a Secretary of State number. Now you're an entity, but you're not ready yet to do real estate. Once you want to do real estate in the name of your entity, well, everyone who does real estate for other people for compensation requires a license, including entities. So your next stop is the Real Estate Commission. You say, look, I've got my SOS number. I've created the entity. Now, can you please let my entity do real estate for others for money? The commission will say, well, yes, we will grant you a firm license. So you get a firm license for your entity. Once you have a firm license for your entity, you need a BIC. And you're probably going to be the BIC at first. I'm the BIC, and I don't have any provisional brokers. I have no one except me, just me. I'm my own BIC. I'm the BIC over just one person. I could hire all of you for the sake of the example. Once you pass your test, you come to me, I'll hire you. Now I've got 10 people who are provisional brokers, and I'm the BIC over you. But then maybe I'm still listing and selling, and I'm like, I need to put all my efforts toward that. I don't have time to be a BIC because I've got 10 provisionals, and I need to be like tuned into their business. I don't have time for this anymore. I'm going to hire someone else to be the BIC over my provisionals and the BIC and broker in charge in general. And I'm going to own the company and do my own little thing, listing and selling myself. That's a very real possibility too, right? But quite often in the beginning, the one who starts the firm is the one who becomes the BIC, at least for a while. And that firm, that entity with the firm license is doing all the same stuff the human within the firm is doing. The human is the one who's doing it, but they're doing it in the name of the firm. Why? Because by getting paid in the name of the firm, you have some tax benefits. You have some liability protection. That's a good point. There's an option if you want the tax benefits and the liability protection that you can start your own entity, but still work for your firm that you've been at. So you have the BIC of that firm. Let's just say ABC Realty. Just fill in the blank with the local firm that you're familiar with, a national firm, whatever firm you're thinking of in your head. They have a broker under them, and that broker wants to start an entity, but they don't want to run like a team or do their own thing. They don't want to set up their own firm and say, I am Happy House Realty. They want to stay in that big firm they're in, but they want the benefits of having an entity. That does not require a broker in charge. They do not have to declare a BIC in that situation. There is a loophole for that. We cover that more in 303, post 303, but that is absolutely a possibility. And I bet a lot of brokers do that. We covered all this stuff in our time together: listings, buying, helping buyers, helping people with rentals, both property management and tenants, helping tenants find places to rent. You could do that as a newer agent. You might be more inclined to want to do that. It doesn't pay a lot for that activity, but it could result in pay later. It could result down the road when they get ready to buy in a year, once their lease is up, in a buy situation. You never know who you're talking to. You never know what they end up doing. I met someone, high school friend, at a place she wanted to look at rentals, and that turned in, she didn't know that she could buy. She just assumed that she'd never really explored it. And I showed her that, look, why are you paying rent? I don't know. I'm just used to it. Well, would you rather buy? Well, yeah, I just never bothered to look into it. Okay, well, here's a lender to talk to. And instead of getting her into that rental, where, by the way, I would have made like $100 to put her in that rental, she ended up buying something. Now, that was best for her. It might be better for her to have rented, and that's okay too. As long as you lead with what's best for the client, that is the most important part. I didn't push her to buy because I didn't only want to make $100. It was something she didn't even know that she could do, and she was more interested in buying once she found that out. But sometimes, especially in this day and age, it's actually better for them to rent, at least for the short term. Terrible thing to say as a salesperson, but you're building your business on relationships, not transactions. If you're geared toward making that one commission on that one transaction, it can really kind of make it tempting for you to cut corners and maybe even do things wrong altogether knowingly, because you're just trying to get that commission. And that's a terrible way to build a business. You're going to not only be jeopardizing your license with the commission, but if that client finds out that you put yourself before them because you could make a little more on this one and you were pushing them toward this other house, that's going to kill any future business from them. Auctioning requires a license. Referring requires a license, and that is an underappreciated activity that our license allows us to engage in. You can make some good money referring. I think I might have mentioned to you, there's a retirement guy who pretty much done with his official corporate job, and up in Huntersville, he's at a firm, and I taught him I did a CE class that he was in. And that's all he ever did. He got his license not to ever show property or to list property. He just wanted to be a referral agent. And so the first thing he did with some of his retirement money after he got his license and became active was drop 20 grand on TV and radio ads. Not saying that's what you should do. I'm just saying he did it this way. He got the phone ringing with leads and handed those leads off and referred them to the agents in his firm. And wherever that person needed to buy something, if it's not in that immediate area, he would just find another agent wherever, including other states, other countries. You can get referral fees from anywhere. And that's all he does. He just keeps the machine rolling. He's basically a little mini Zillow. He created a little Zillow business for himself. That's all he wants to do. He's probably 65 years old. He doesn't want to show houses. He doesn't want to show 20 houses on Sunday, or even go list a house and go there at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night. He just sits back, makes those referral fees. Those are negotiable, by the way, if that's another question. Totally negotiable. I've seen as little as 20, 25%. I've seen 30 when it's a corporate referral, like a corporate relocation where a big company asks you to help them with one of their future employees who's relocating. Those tend to go up. Those have gone up over the years. When I was brand new, everybody was grumbling because those corporations were wanting you to pay a 30% referral fee. But I've also heard of 40s and 50s, and it just depends. If it's a steady stream of business, maybe you could justify paying 40, 50% referral fee for every single one. Also, the price point. What amount of money does that leave you? Business decision. No right or wrong answer. Referrals are an underappreciated part of having your license. That means talk to everybody. Don't just talk to people that need to do something this week. Talk to people that are thinking about it. Even the people that say, well, I'm deciding between Concord and Raleigh. You can help them too. Let me connect you with a Raleigh agent and I'll get a referral fee if you choose Raleigh. But if it's here, I'll help you for the one down here. So at the very least, you show them some stuff down here. They end up picking Raleigh. You're at least going to make a referral fee off of your time that you spent showing down here. What does not require a license? Testable stuff here. Knowing what requires a license or not. You can hire an unlicensed person to put things in the MLS. Entering data in the MLS, but because it's your name, because it's your listing, you better make sure that they did it right. Maybe good practice would be enter it, save it as incomplete, and let me look at it before we make it active. Whatever it is, you, the broker with the license on the line, needs to make sure they put the data in correctly, that you gave them the right data to put in, maybe. That unlicensed person can run things around the town, documents, courier-related duties, including boxes and signs. You don't need to be spending your time on boxes and signs. That's like $15, $20 an hour work. If you do the math on a pretty low price point property, you're probably looking at least $100 an hour, if not double that your time is worth just on the commission that you earn. Depending on your price point, depending on how much time you put in it, it's going to be worse if you go all the way to the end and it falls through and you got to start over. But point being, you're worth more than $10 an hour activity. The old saying is, if you don't have an assistant, you are an assistant. You got to do that work. Somebody's got to do it. So when you're brand new, you have to do it. But when you start having some money in the bank and you have to make a decision, should I take this sign out to the property or flyers or whatever, or should I go on this listing appointment or talk or get on the phone and try to find a new client? Your time is better spent on the growing the business side of things. So use an unlicensed person to do that. You're allowed to. And they can answer the phone for you and even provide basic information. Somebody calls and your unlicensed assistant answers the phone and they say, tell me about the listing on ABC Street. And your assistant pulls the sheet up and they say, it's 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, they're asking 150. That's okay. If the person who's calling says, well, 150, would they take 140? Let you speak to my boss. They would not get into that conversation. Nothing negotiating wise, nothing about real estate actual activity. They can just read off of a form. They can schedule appointments. They can coordinate things. That's more than just showings. That's also appointments of like vendors, repair people, inspectors. They can schedule and coordinate all that good stuff. That stuff eats up your day. Once you have a couple of listings and a few under contract, you could spend your entire day doing what's on this list right here and not spend any of it trying to get more business. And that's the cause of failure for most brokers. That's what slowly leads most agents to fail out of the business in the first couple of years. They spend their time on this stuff and not on the stuff that actually increases their list of clients. That unlicensed assistant can also fill in the blanks for you as long as they're doing it for you and not the client. In other words, you could call them and say, hey, we're headed back to the office. I want to make an offer on this thing. It's this property and we want to offer a $350. Go ahead and, look up the tax record. You've got my buyer's information, fill it all out. And when I get there, I'll review it with the client myself. So you wouldn't have your unlicensed person go over it with the client, but they can do it for you to save you time. And then, of course, you make sure it's done right. They can prepare pre-printed forms. And then rentals are a different ballgame. An unlicensed assistant can never show properties for sale. Testable. Unlicensed people can't show properties for sale, but they can show properties that are for rent. The chances of a discussion turning to a broker-required negotiation level conversation are much greater when it's a for sale property than if it's a rental. That's sort of the logic behind it. So unlicensed can show rentals. They cannot show sale properties for sale. They also can't do open houses by themselves. You would not park your unlicensed assistant in that open house without you being there or some broker being there. They can execute, that means sign on behalf of, they can execute pre-printed leases for an employer. Okay, we're talking about an unlicensed person who is being paid as a salary W-2 employee by their broker boss in property management. They can execute pre-printed leases for their employer without a license. That's a different ballgame. When it's property management and a W-2 employee doing it for their broker boss, they can do some real estate without a license, and this is some of that. Things that are exempt. In other words, things where people can do real estate without a license and it's still legal. A business entity, just like a for sale by owner can sell their own property without an agent, an entity can sell its own property without an agent. So the entity owns the property. They're basically for sale by owner. And the person in charge of the entity can do real estate without a license because they're doing their own real estate. An attorney or someone given the power of attorney, who could be anybody for that matter, they are exempt. They can, as long as they're doing real estate in the course of that legal work. The attorney can't just do real estate for fun without a license if it doesn't apply to some of their legal work. It would have to be a part of their law client and their needs. But the attorney can't say, well, I'm an attorney. I'm just going to go out trying to get a bunch of listings. Well, no, you can't do that. But if your legal law client has a property that needs to be sold or dealt with, then as their attorney, they can do it. They can do real estate without a license because it's attached to the legal work they're doing for someone. You can do real estate without a license if the court orders you to handle something for someone. And that sort of goes back to, well, you're essentially the owner at that point, kind of. You're doing work for the owner. The court ordered you to be handling their affairs for them. And a trustee, similar kind of a thing, can do real estate without a license. We just talked about W-2 property management employees, unlicensed. They can do real estate without a license. And housing authority employees, same thing. They work for a housing authority that involves real estate. It's housing. Therefore, they don't aren't required to have a license, they can still do real estate because they are working for a housing authority. And we know that for sale and for lease by owner does not require the license. A lot of these are all about, did the court order it? Did the court declare that you are able to do stuff for someone else? Closing in, got a couple of more minutes. Let's finish out whatever we can, and then bring your questions. Make sure you review those practice questions. I saw the ones in Notion. We're going to put answers in those today, and just keep on with that. And let's talk about it. We will tell me in the chat, by the way, what sort of stuff you would like to cover. We've got our list, but we want to make it specific to your needs as well. So let me know. I have a feeling math might be in that list, but what types of math in particular? So either put it in Notion, put it in right here, either way, so that we can kind of see what's coming up and what we need to work on. And we'll just do a lot of review over the next 2 days. But let's finish this. How many commissioners are there on the Real Estate Commission? How many actual commissioners that are in charge? There it is. Yeah, good job. 9 of them. A common wrong answer is 7, because 7 is how many the governor can appoint. 1 is appointed by the Speaker, 1 is appointed by the Senate, Speaker of the House and Senate, for a total of 9. You'll never have all 9 be brand new. They're rotated in. Are they elected or are they appointed? Good question, because it's right there in front of you. Big difference, though. It's not an election, it's an appointment. Are they paid? Are they paid? Do they make a salary? Do they? No, they're it's the privilege. They're given compensation for room and board, for, or I should say, travel, and because it does take like 2 days of their time every month. But there is some of that, but it's not something they're doing to make money at. They're still doing other things. And how are they making their money? Well, 3 of them must be licensed brokers, minimum, because it's a real estate commission. So let's make sure we have brokers on it. And then at least 2 of them, let's get the perspective of people that aren't all about this business. It's probably beneficial to the consumer, because that's what the Real Estate Commission is all about, protecting the consumer. It's in the consumer's best interest to get a non-real estate person's opinion and perspective. Therefore, at least 2 are not allowed to be in real estate. They do all kinds of things. You know this by now. The licensing is what we're working on right now. They want to license you. They want to add you to their list of 79,000 plus people paying them $45 a year and taking good care of consumers, right? They also are in charge of registering timeshare projects, education, which is what we're doing, investigation of complaints. This tends to be the one that we always think about first, but essentially just protecting the public, protecting the consumer, right? Putting the rules and laws into place so that we do it right. But if we don't do it right, disciplining us when we don't. Yep. But it's not just those 9 sitting up there in Raleigh calling all the shots and doing everything. They've got support. They've got support in lots of different departments. They've got a legal department. They've got an education department. It's not the real estate commissioners that decide what test questions to ask you directly. They've got people for that. They have input, but they've got an education department that says, let's see what another good test question might be. This is their main objective, to protect the public and to educate us so that we can protect the public. It all revolves around the public, the consumer being protected. What if you as a broker are mad at another broker and think that you should get the commission that they got instead? Would you complain to the commission about that? They're not all about listening to your problem with the other broker. Who would you talk to about a complaint? There is somebody. Well, what outside party? You would certainly start with your BIC. Absolutely. Good job. Let's call them the board, the realtor board, right? So local realtor board, the local board of realtors, because your membership in the Realtor Association requires that you adhere to a code of ethics. And when it's a broker to broker discipline problem, where a consumer is not so much involved, then you're going to go to the board for that. There's going to be probably an arbitration hearing. And I had one where another broker in my big firm that I was at the time thought that he got paid the commission. He should have, but I got it. I got it. He wanted it because it was the same client. She had dealt with him first. I might have told you the story. And it was the same firm though. He was at a different branch of my same firm. And so our manager said, let's not tell the whole world about our dirty laundry. Would you agree to let us handle this in-house? But if not, we would have had to go to the realtor board and handle it there. And they would have been like, oh, ABC Realty's got 2 brokers that are mad at each other, and then we got a hearing to deal with. So we agreed, okay, whatever. We'll let our own managers handle it. And they set it up, and I won. I probably wouldn't have told you the story if I had not won. Violations of license law. Here's the 4 big things, and then we'll call it a day. Here's what they could decide. What is not on this list? What does the Real Estate Commission not do? There you go. They don't fine us. When your hearing happens, they're either going to deem that you're not guilty. That's a possibility. But as far as the discipline, they're going to either reprimand you, note in the file, slap on the wrist, censure you. Probably if you're getting slapped on the wrist, note in the file, it's going to be a reprimand first. The censure might be something if it's a recurring problem. The commission themselves have said, distinguishing between the two, not so sure. It just depends. So they're both kind of like that. Suspension, though, that's an elevated tier. Now you get to take a break. They might suspend your suspension, though. They could say, you've got to take a break from doing real estate. But as long as you complete these classes, we'll let you keep doing it. But if you don't do the classes in time, now you're officially suspended. And then the worst one is, you just need to go do something else. Revoking the license. But that fine thing, there is an exception for every rule. And in this case, who could they fine? They don't fine most of the time, but they could fine a timeshare developer. There you go. $500 per violation. And that is our time today. So I'll see you on Wednesday. Bring your questions. We're all geared up for 2 good days of review. And I'll see you then. Bye.
Bye, everybody.